Notes and Queries, number 166, January 1st, 1853. By various. Replies. Reply. Return. A valued correspondent, who has strongly urged the adoption of the course which we are now recommending to our readers, thus illustrates his position. It seems to be a very good thing to have a medium of genealogical inquiry, but why should all the world be troubled with the answers to a man who writes, "Sir, I shall be obliged to anybody who can give me a full account of my family. John Smith. Again, supposing X. Y. wants to borrow some not very common book which one happens to have, I am not going to write, and if I did so write you would not print it. If X. Y. as soon as he sees this, will call on the pump at Aldgate, he will find my copy of the book tied to the spout, if the charity boys have not cribbed it, and he can return it or not, according to his conscience, if he has any." Notes. Proclamations of the Society of Antiquaries, and their value as historical evidences. The work that is now going on at the Society of Antiquaries in reference to the collection of royal proclamations in their library is one in which not merely the fellows of that society, but all historical students, are deeply interested. The Society possesses one of the three known largest collections of these public documents. They were formerly bound up in volumes of several different sizes, intermixed with a variety of fugitive publications, such as ballads and broadsides, which formed altogether a very incongruous collection. A short time since it was found that the binding of many of the volumes was very much worn, and that some of the documents themselves had been considerably torn and damaged. Under these circumstances, Mr. Lemon, of the State Paper Office, offered his services to the Council to superintend an entire new arrangement, mounting, binding, and calendaring, of the whole series of proclamations. His offer was of course gratefully accepted, and the work is now in active progress. The collection is certainly the most important that is known, and is especially so in the reign of Elizabeth, in reference to which there is no collection at all approaching to it, either in completeness or value. Still there are many proclamations wanting. Several of the fellows of the Society have come forward most liberally to fill up gaps. Mr. Payne Collier led the way in a contribution of great value. Mr. Salt followed Mr. Collier with a munificent donation of a whole collection relating to Charles II. and James II, and upon Mr. Lemon's suggestion, and with the joint concurrence of Mr. Secretary Walpole and the Keeper of the State Paper Office, an interchange of duplicates has been effected between that office and the Society of Antiquaries, which has added 40 proclamations to the Society's collection. Mr. Payne Collier. Mr. Salt. Mr. Collier. My principal reason for addressing you upon this subject is to ask you to suggest to your readers that a similar interchange of duplicates might be effected between the Society and any persons who chance to have duplicate proclamations in their possession. It is of the very highest literary and historical importance that we should get together, in some accessible place, a collection of proclamations, which, if not actually complete, a consummation hardly to be expected, shall yet approach to completeness. The collection at Somerset House offers the best opportunity for forming such a collection. It is by far the most nearly complete in existence, and is strong in that particular part of the series in which other collections are most effective, and in which missing proclamations are the most difficult to be supplied. At the Society of Antiquaries the collection will be accessible to all literary inquirers, and no doubt the Society will publish a proper catalogue, which is already in preparation by Mr. Lemon. It is obvious that any person who chooses to contribute such stray proclamations, or copies of proclamations, as he may chance to have in his possession, will be helping forward a really good work, and the possessor of duplicates may not only do the same, but may benefit his own collection by an interchange. The value of proclamations as historical authorities, and especially as authorities for the history of manners, and of our national progress, is indisputable. As I write, I have before me the Book of Proclamations of James I, from 1603 to 1609, and the page lying open affords a striking illustration of what I assert. It gives us a chapter in the history of our post office. A chapter in the history of our post office. Immediately on the accession of James I, The high north road from London to Edinburgh was thronged with multitudes of pilgrims hastening to the worship of the newly risen Sunday. Robert Carey became, in the words of Cooper's Enigma, the parent of numbers that cannot be told. Scotland has never poured into the south more active or more anxious suppliants than then traversed the northward road through Berwick. All ordinary accommodation soon fell short of the demand. Messengers riding post from the council to the king were stayed on the road for want of the ordinary supply of post horses, all which were taken up by lords and gentry, rushing northward in the fury of their new-born loyalty. As a remedy for these inconveniences, the lords of the council issued a proclamation, calling upon all magistrates to aid the postmasters, in this time so full of business, by seeing that they are supplied with fresh and able horses as necessity shall require. Of course, the supply was merely of horses. Travelers could not in those days obtain carriages of any kind. The horses were directed to be able and sufficient horses, and well furnished of saddles, bridles, girths, and stirrups, with good guides to look to them, who for their said horses shall demand and receive of such as shall ride on them the prices accustomed. The new state of things became permanent. London, after James's removal from Edinburgh, being really the seat of government for the whole island, the intercourse both ways was continuous, and further general orders for its management were published by proclamation. There were at that time, on all the high roads through the country, two sorts of posts: 1. Special messengers or couriers who rode thorough posts, that is, themselves rode through the whole distance, with horn and guide. Such persons carried with them an authentication of their employment in the public service. In 1603, they were charged 2 halfpenny the mile, raised in 1609 to 3 for the hire of each horse. Besides the guide's groats, the hire was to be paid beforehand. They were not to ride the horses more than one stage, except with the consent of the post of the stage, at which they did not change. Nor were they to charge the horse with any mail or burden besides his rider that exceedeth the weight of 30 pounds, nor to ride more than 7 miles an hour in summer or 6 in winter. 2. The other sort of post was what was termed the post for the packet. For this service every postmaster was bound to keep horses ready, and on receipt of a packet, or parcel containing letters, he was to send it on towards the next stage within a quarter of an hour after its arrival, entering the transaction in a large and fair ledger paper book. 2 horses were to be kept constantly ready for this service, with furniture convenient, and messengers at hand in a readiness. The postmaster was also to have ready 2 bags of leather, at the least, well lined with baize or cotton, to carry the packet in. He was also to have ready horns to sound and blow, as oft as the post meets company, or 4 times in every mile. The post for the packet was at first used only for the carriage of dispatches for the government, or for ambassadors, but a similar mode of conveyance soon began to be taken advantage of by merchants and private persons. Difficulty in obtaining posts and horses for the conveyance of private packets led to the interference of certain persons called hackneymen, tapsters, hostlers, and others in hiring out their horses, to the hindrance of public service, danger to our state, and wrong to our standing in settled posts in their several stages. The government of James I thought, in its blindness, that it could put a stop to the dangerous practice of transmitting unofficial letters, by rendering it penal for private persons to carry them. That of Charles I, wiser in this respect, in its generation, settled a scheme for their general conveyance through the medium of a letter office. But the post for the packet, with his leathern bag and his twanging horn, the origin, of course, of our mail coach horn, continued down to a late period, and probably still lingers in some parts of the kingdom. Cooper, it will be remembered, describes him admirably. John Bruce. John Bruce. Curiosities of Advertising Literature. We are all well acquainted with the ingenious artifices by which modern advertisers thrust their wares upon the attention of newspaper readers. We may, perhaps, have been betrayed into the expression of some rude Saxon expletive, when, in the columns devoted to news and general information, we have in our innocence been tempted with a paragraph that commenced with a clever saying of the illustrious Voltaire's, and dovetailed into a panegyric of Messrs. Aaron and Sons' reversible pale tots. Or we may have applauded the clever logician who so clearly demonstrates that as Napoleon's bilious affection frequently clouded his judgment in times of greatest need, the events of the present century, and the fate of nations, would have been reversed, had that great man only been persuaded to take 2 boxes of Snooks's aperient pill, price 1s, 1.5d, with the government stamp on a red ground, see advertisement. All these things we know very well, but of the fugitive literature that does not find a place in the advertising columns of the Times, but flashes into fame only in the pages of some local oracle, or in some obscure broadsheet, how often must it remain unappreciated, and doomed to waste its sweetness on the desert air? That this may not be said of the following burst of advertising eloquence, I trust it may be found worthy a niche in the temple of N&Q. In its composition the author was probably inspired by the grand scenery of the Cheviots, in a village near to which his shop was situate. It was one of those generally useful shops where the grocer and draper held equal reign, and anything could be got, from silks and satins to butter and Bath bricks. The composition was printed and distributed among the neighboring families. But shortly after, when the author heard that it had not produced the exact effect he had wished, he, with the irritability that often accompanies genius, resolved to get back and destroy every copy of his production, and deny to the world that which it could not appreciate. Fortunately for the world's welfare, I preserved a copy of his handbill, of which this, in its turn, is a faithful transcript. To the inhabitants of G. and its neighborhood. The present age is teeming with advantages which no preceding era in the history of mankind has afforded to the human family. New schemes are projecting to enlighten and extend civilization, railways have been projected and carried out by an enterprising and spirited nation, while science in its gigantic power, simple yet sublime, affords to the humane mind so many facilities to explore its rich resources. The seasons roll on in their usual course, producing light and heat, the vivifying rays of the sun, and the fructifying influences of nature producing food and happiness to the sons of toil, while to the people of G. and its neighborhood a rich and extensive variety of fashionable goods is to be found in my warehouse, which have just been selected with the greatest care. The earliest visit is requested to convey to the mind an adequate idea of the great extent of his purchases, comprising as it does all that is elegant and useful, cheap and substantial, to the light-hearted votaries of matrimony, the matrons of reflection, the man of industry, and the disconsolate victims of bereavement. J.M. The peroration certainly exhibits what Mrs. Malaprop calls a nice derangement of epitaphs, and us for the rest, surely. The force of bathos could no further go. Cuthbert Bede, B.A. Cuthbert Bede. On a passage in King Henry VIII, Act 3, Sc. 2. One of the most desperately unintelligible passages in Shakespeare occurs in this play, in the scene between the king and the cardinal, when the latter professes his devoted attachment to his service. It stands thus in the first folio. Car. I do profess that for your highness good, I ewer labored more than mine own, that am, and will be. Though all the world should crack their duty to you, and throw it from their soul, though perils did abound, as thick as thought could make and appear in forms more horrid, yet my duty, as doth a rock against the chiding flood, should the approach of this wild rear break, and stand shaken yours. Upon this Mason observes, I can find no meaning in these words, that am, have, and will be, or see how they are connected with the rest of the sentence, and should therefore strike them out. Malone says, I suppose the meaning is that or such a man I am, have been, and will ever be. Our author has many hard and forced expressions in his plays, but many of the hardnesses in the piece before us appear to me of a different color from those of Shakespeare. Perhaps, however, a line following has been lost, for in the old copy there is no stop at the end of this line, and indeed I have some doubt whether a comma ought not to be placed at it, rather than a full point. Mr. Knight, however, places a full point at will be, and says, there is certainly some corruption in this passage, for no ellipsis can have taken this very obscure form. Z. Jackson suggests that aim has and will be. This is very harsh. We might read that aim I have and will being a noun. Mr. Collier has the following note. In this place we can do no more than reprint exactly the old text, with the old punctuation, as if Woolsey, following that am, have, and will be by a long parenthesis, had forgotten how he commenced his sentence. Something may have been lost, which would have completed the meaning, and the instances have not been infrequent where lines, necessary to the sense, have been recovered from the quarto impressions. Here we have no quarto impressions to resort to, and the later folios afford us no assistance, as they reprint the passage as it stands in the folio 1628, excepting that the two latest end the parenthesis at break. I cannot think that the poet would have put a short speech into Woolsey's mouth, making him forget how he commenced it. Nor do I believe that anything has been lost, except the slender letter I preceding am. The printer or transcriber made the easy mistake of taking the word true for Hall, which as written of old would readily occur, and having thus confused the passage, had recourse to the unconscionable long mark of a parenthesis. The passage undoubtedly should stand thus. Car. I do profess that for your Highness good I ever labored, more than mine own, that I am true, and will be, though all the world should lack their duty to you, and throw it from their soul, though perils did abound, as thick as thought could make them, and appear in forms more horrid, yet my duty, as doth a rock against the chiding flood, should the approach of this wild river break, and stand unshaken yours. Here all is congruous and clear. This slight correction of a palpable printer's error redeems a fine passage hitherto entirely unintelligible. I do not insist upon the correction in the fourth line of lack for crack, yet what can be meant by cracking a duty? The Duke, in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, speaks of his daughter as lacking duty, and seeing how very negligently the whole passage has been given in the folio, I think there is good ground for its reception. With regard to the correction in the second line, I feel confident, and doubt not that it will have the approbation of all who, like myself, feel assured that most of the difficulties in the text of our great poet are attributable to careless printer or transcriber. When I proposed, Volume 6, page 468, to read Rail at Once, instead of All at Once, in As You Like It, Act 3, SC 5, I thought the conjecture my own. Having then only access to the editions of Mr. Collier and Mr. Knight, I consequently said, "It is somewhat singular that the passage should hitherto have passed unquestioned." My surprise was therefore great, on turning to the passage in the Variorum Shakespeare, to find the following note by Warburton, which had escaped my notice. If the speaker intended to accuse the person spoken to only for insulting and exulting, then, instead of all at once, it ought to have been both at once. But examining the crime of the person accused, we shall discover that the line is to be read thus: that you insult, exult, and rail at once. For these three things Phoebe was guilty of. But the Oxford editor improves it, and for rail at once reads domineer. I have no recollection of having ever read the note before, and certainly was not conscious of it. The coincidence, therefore, may be considered, as Mr. Collier observed in respect to the reading of palpable for capable, as much in favor of this conjecture. That the most careful printers can misread, and consequently misprint, copy, is evident from the following error in my last note, Volume 6, page 584, Kernel 1, 4. In the edition which I gave of the part read, Poet. This mistake, like most of those I have indicated in the first folio Shakespeare, might easily occur if the word was indistinctly written. S.W. Singer. S.W. Singer. Michelham. Notes on Bacon's Essays. As I find that the editor of Bacon's Essays for Bond's Standard Library has not verified the quotations, I venture to send you a few N and Q on them, which I hope to continue from time to time, if they prove acceptable. In compliance with the recommendation of Mr. Sidney Smirk and the Rev. H. T. Ellicombe, Volume 6, page 558, I append my name and address. Mr. Sidney Smirk. Rev. H. T. Ellicombe. N.B. The paging and notes of Bond's edition are followed throughout. Preface, page 13. Note star. Speech on the Impeachment of Warren Hastings. See Burke's Works, Volume 8. Page 15. Edition 1827. Speech on the First Day of Reply. Ditto, page 15. Letter to Father Fulgencio. See Montague's Bacon, Volume 11. Pref, page 7, Volume 12. Page 205. Ditto, ditto. Spencer's Fairy Queen, and c. See Preface to Moxon's Spencer, 1850, page 29, where this story is refuted, and Montague, 16, note X. Ditto, page 16. It was like another man's fair ground. And c. See Montague, 16, page 27. Ditto, ditto. I shall die. And c. Ditto, 34. And note WW. Ditto, page 17. Note. Dougald Stewart. Supplement to Encyclopedia Brit. Volume 1, page 54. Edition 1824. Ditto, ditto. H. A. Ton, not H. U. Ton, as in Eliza Cook's Journal, 6. 235. Ditto, ditto. Love and Ignoble Passion. SAX, add in it. Ditto, page 18. Says Macaulay. Review of B. Montague's Bacon Essays, page 355. Edition 1851. Ditto, ditto. A pamphlet. Montague 6. 299. Ditto, page 19. A place in the Canticles. Cap. 2, 1. Bacon quotes from memory, it would appear, from the Vulgate, which has Ego Flos Campi. By whom is the observation? C. For the story, Montague 16. Page 98. Ditto, ditto. Books were announced. What? Ditto, p. XX. Caesar's compliment to Cicero. Where recorded? Ditto, page 21. The manufacture of particular articles of trade. Montague 16. 306. Ditto, page 22. Says Macaulay. UT Supra, page 407. Ditto, ditto. Ben Jonson. See Underwood's 69. 78. Pages 711, 713. Edition Moxon, 1851. Ditto, page 25. Marcus Lucius. Who is here alluded to? Ditto, page 27. Which strangely parodies. The opening alluded to is Franciscus de Verulam sic cogitavit. Ditto, page 28. One solitary line. Where is this to be found? Ditto, ditto. Ben Jonson after sketching. See Discoveries, page 749. UT Sup. Ditto, page 29. Might have censured with Hume. Where? Ditto, ditto. Hobbes. Where does he praise Bacon? Ditto, ditto. Bell. In Bell's Dictionary, English edition, 1710 S. V. We find but 14 lines on Bacon. Ditto, ditto. Tacitus. Vit. Agriculture Cap. 44. Ditto, page 33. Note. Solomon's House. See page 296. Sequentia of the volume of the Standard Library. Ditto, page 34. Note. Paterculus Sci. 17. 6. Berman. To be continued. P. J. F. Gantolin B.A. P. J. F. Gantolin. 26. Hills Road, Cambridge. Latin Poems in Connection with Waterloo. I send you 2 copies of Latin verses which have not, to my knowledge, appeared in print. They are, however, interesting, from the coincidence of their both relating to elm trees, and in some measure belonging to the story of Waterloo, about which we never can hear too much. The lines themselves possess considerable merit, and, as their authors were respectively distinguished alumni of Eton and Winchester, I hope to see both compositions placed in juxtaposition in the columns of N and Q. The first of these productions was written by Marquis Wellesley, as an inscription for a chair carved from the Wellington elm, which stood near the centre of the British lines on the field of Waterloo, and presented to His Majesty King George IV, to whom the lines were addressed. Ampla interspolia et magni decora alta triumphi. Ulmus erit fastis com memoranda tuas. Quam super exoriens fausta tibi gloria penna. Palmum oleamque uno detilit alma die. Immortale decus manit, famac perenni. Velis sic geras septra paterna manu. Et toa victrices dum singit tempora lori. Materis solio digna sit istato. For the other verses subjoined, we are indebted to the late Rev. William Crowe, Fellow of New College, Oxford, and many years public orator in that university. It seems that he had planted an elm at his parsonage on the birth of his son, afterwards killed at Waterloo, which sad event was commemorated by his afflicted father in the following touching monody, affixed to the same tree. Hanc ego quam felix annis meliori basulmum. Ipsi manus sevi, tibi delectisime fili. Consecro in aeternum, Gilium vocabiter arbos. Haec tua, servabit tuum per secula nomen. T genros pure nil muneris hujus egentem. T jam perfunctum vitae bellice labor. Ad scripsa Deus, et coelestibus intellit oris. Me tamen afflictum, me consolabitur egram. Hoc tibi quod pono, quamquam leve pignus amoris. Hic ego de vita meditans de sort futura. Sip tuum reculum formum, dulcem colloquialum. Verbectam puro et sacrato font perfecta. Quam festiva cadem, et facili condita lapor. At te, canastris quicunc accessoris hosps. Sedibus, unimoro, moesti revere parentis. Nec tu spern prex quas hac super arbor fundo. Sit tibi non invisa, sit inviolata securi. Et quantum natura sinit, crescat monumentum. Egregiae juvenes, cassivo est Marte peremptus. Fortiter obi patrium pugnando, sic tibi constans. Stet fortuna domus, sit nulli obnoxia damno. Nec vidias unquam delecti funera nadi. Braybrook. Braybrook. Sir Henry Wotton and Milton. The letter which Sir Henry Wotton addressed to Milton, on receiving the masque presented at Ludlow Castle, appears to admit of an interpretation which has escaped the numerous editors of the works of Milton, and I resolved to put this novel conjecture on its trial in the critical court of facts and inferences held at number 186, Fleet Street. Sir Henry Wotton thus expresses himself on the circumstance which I conceived to have been misinterpreted. For the work itself, a dainty piece of entertainment by Milton, I had viewed some good while before with singular delight, having received it from our common friend Mr. R., in the very close of the late R.'s poems, printed at Oxford, whereunto it is added, as I now suppose, that the accessory might help out the principal, according to the art of stationers, and to leave the reader con la bocca dolce. Reliqui Wattoniani, 1672. In the poems of Milton, as edited by himself in 1645, the date of this letter is April 13, 1638. And as the poems of Thomas Randolph, Master of Arts, and late Fellow of Trinity College in Cambridge, were printed at Oxford in that year, in small quarto, it may be assumed that the gift of Mr. R. was a copy of that volume, with the addition of the masque, as printed in the same size in 1637. Such was the conclusion of Wharton, and such is mine. The question at issue is, who was Mr. R.? Wharton says, I believe Mr. R. to be John Rouse, the keeper of the Bodleian Library. Is it not more probable that Mr. R. means Robert Randolph, Master of Arts, and student of Christ Church, a younger brother of Thomas Randolph, and the editor of his poems? I must first dispose of the assertion that the friendship between Rouse and Milton appears to have subsisted in 1637. There is no evidence of their friendship till 1647, and that evidence is the Ode to Rouse, to which this address is prefixed. January 23, 1646. Adjonum Risium, Oxoniensis Academiae Bibliothecarium. De libro poemitum amisso, quamal sibi de no midi postulabat, ut cum aliis nostris in Bibliotheca Publica reponerit, Ode. It seems that Milton did not send the volume of 1645 till a copy of it had been requested. No evidence, certainly, of old friendship. I admit the probability that Wotton and Rouse were friends, but why should Rouse officiously stitch up, as Wharton expresses it, the masque of Milton with the poems of Thomas Randolph, and present the volume to Wotton? Did he give away that which is still wanting in the Bodleian library? Admit my novel conjecture, and all the difficulties vanish. Thomas Randolph, says Phillips, was one of the most pregnant young wits of his time, and Robert, who was also noted as a poet, could scarcely fail to offer the poems of his brother to so eminent a person as Sir Henry Wotton. As Sir Henry yearly went to Oxford, he may have made acquaintance with Robert, and Robert may have been introduced to Milton by Thomas, who was for 8 years his contemporary at Cambridge, and in the enjoyment of much more celebrity. The Masque may have been added as an experiment in criticism. The Rev. Thomas Warton was a man of extensive reading, an excellent critic, and a fascinating writer, but too often inattentive to accuracy of statement. He says that Randolph died the March 17, 1634. Wood says he was buried the March 17, 1634. He says it is so stated on his monument. The monument has no date. He says the poems of Randolph contain 114 pages. The volume contains 368 pages. He says the Masque is a slight quarto of 30 pages only. It contains 40 pages. Is it not fit that such carelessness should be exposed? Bolton Corney. Bolton Corney. Folklore. Unlucky to sell eggs after sunset. The following paragraph is extracted from the Stamford Mercury of October 29, 1852. There exists a species of superstition in North Nottinghamshire against letting eggs go out of a house after sunset. The other day a person in want of some eggs called at a farmhouse in East Markham, and inquired of the good woman of the house whether she had any eggs to sell, to which she replied that she had a few scores to dispose of. Then I'll take them home with me in the cart, was his answer, to which she somewhat indignantly replied, that you'll not, don't you know the sun has gone down? You are welcome to the eggs at a proper hour of the day, but I would not let them go out of the house after the sun is set on any consideration whatever. Drawfield. Drawfield. Old Song. My father gave me an acre of land. Sing ivy, sing ivy. My father gave me an acre of land. Sing green bush, holly, and ivy. I plowed it with a ram's horn. Sing ivy, and see. I harrowed it with a bramble. Sing ivy, and see. I sowed it with a peppercorn. Sing ivy, and see. I reaped it with my penknife. Sing ivy, and see. I carried it to the mill upon the cat's back. Sing ivy, and see. Then follows some more which I forget, but I think it ends thus. I made a cake for all the king's men. Sing ivy, sing ivy. I made a cake for all the king's men. Sing green bush, holly, and ivy. D. Nursery Tale. I saddled my sow with a sieve full of buttermilk, put my foot into the stirrup, and leaped 9 miles beyond the moon into the land of temperance, where there was nothing but hammers and hatchets and candlesticks, and there lay bleeding old Knowles. I let him lie, and sent for old Hipponoles, and asked him if he could grind green steel 9 times finer than wheat flour. He said he could not. Gregory's wife was up in the pear tree gathering 9 corns of buttered peas to pay St. James' rent. St. James was in the meadow mowing oat cakes. He heard a noise, hung his scythe at his heels, stumbled at the battledore, tumbled over the barn-door ridge, and broke his shins against a bag of moonshine that stood behind the stairs-foot door, and if that isn't true you know as well as I. D. Legend of Change. In one of the magazines for November, a legend, stated to be of Oriental origin, is given, in which an immortal, visiting at distant intervals the same spot, finds it occupied by a city, an ocean, a forest, and a city again, the mortals whom he found there, on each occasion, believing that the present state had existed forever. I have seen in the newspapers, at different times, a poem, or I rather think 2 poems, founded on this legend, and I should like to know the author or authors, and whether it, or either of them, is to be found in any collection of poems. D. X. Passage in Hamlet. Cut off even in the blossoms of my sin. Unhouselled, disappointed, unelded. Hamlet Act I, SC 5. Boucher, in his Glossary of Archaic and Provincial Words, Art. Enniel, has a note on this passage which seems to me to give so much better an idea of the word disappointed than any I have met with, that I am induced to send it you as a note. Ennial. The last two words have occasioned considerable difficulty to the critics. The old copies, it is said, concur in giving disappointed, which Dr. Johnson is willing to understand as meaning unprepared, a sense that might very well suit the context, but will not be easily confirmed by any other instance of the use of the word disappointed. Dissatisfied, therefore, with this interpretation, some have read unanointed, and some unappointed. Not approving of either of these words as connected with unannealed, Pope, no timid corrector of texts, reads unanelled, which he supposes to signify unknelled, or the having no knell rung. To these emendations and interpretations Mr. Theobald, whose merit as a commentator of Shakespeare Mr. Pope, with all his wit and all his poetry, could not bring into dispute, urged many strong objections. Skinner rightly explains annealed as meaning unctus, from the Teutonic preposition in, and ele, oil. As correction of the second word is admitted by all the commentators to be necessary, it is suggested that a clear and consistent meaning, consonant with Shakespeare's manner, will be given to the passage, if, instead of disappointed, unassoiled, which signifies without absolution, be substituted. The line, unhouselled, unassoiled, unannealed, will then signify without receiving the sacrament, without confession and absolution, and without extreme unction. The unassoiled was no less proper, will appear from due attention to the word assoil, which of course is derived from absolvo, and the transition from absolve into assoil is demonstrated in the following passage from Piers Plowman, Vision, page 3. There preached a pardoner, as he a priest were. Brought forth a bull, with many a bishop's seals, and said that himself might absoil him all that. Of falsehood, of fasting, and of vows broken. As a further confirmation of the propriety of substituting a word signifying absolution, which presupposes confession, the following sentence from Prince Arthur may be adduced: she was confessed and houseled, and then she died, Part 2. Page 108. It must be allowed that no instance can be given of the word unassoiled, but neither does any other instance occur to me of the word unhouselled except the line in Hamlet. B.J.S. Volcanic influence on the weather. The recent observations of your correspondent Mr. Noakes, Volume 6, page 531, on the superstitions of the people of Worcestershire regarding the weather, have called my attention to the present extraordinary wet season, on which subject I have been asked many questions. Although I do not account myself any more weatherwise than my neighbors, yet I may note that, for many years past, I have remarked that whenever we have had any very serious volcanic disturbance in the Mediterranean or its neighborhood, or at Mount Hecla, we have always had some corresponding atmospheric agitation in this country, either in excessive heat or moisture or both, and accompanied with very perceptible vibrations, at times so strong as to answer the name of earthquakes, and these, vibrating so generally in the direction from northwest to southeast, I have been convinced that underneath us there is a regular steam passage from Mount Hecla in Iceland to Mount Vesuvius in Italy. I have unfortunately mislaid my memoranda on this subject, and have no regular roster of these occasional visitations to refer to, but I think my attention to this effect was first impressed on me by the season which followed the destruction at Lisbon in 1796. I recollect a friend of mine, the late Mr. Empson, of Belay, while attending some drainage improvements in his cars within the level of Ancombe, was aroused by an extraordinary noise, which he thought was occasioned by some drunken fools, as he called them, racing with their wagons upon the turnpike road above the hill, which was 2 miles off from where he then was in the cars. His uphill shepherd, however, told him, when he got home, that there had been no such occurrence as he supposed on the turnpike, as, had such been the case, he must have heard and seen it. The next day, however, added fresh information, and better observers discovered that the noise heard across the cars was underground, and further intelligence confirmed the suspicion that it was occasioned by a species of earthquake that had been felt at different places with different intensities, through Yorkshire and Lancashire, and amongst the islands west of Scotland, and afterwards came the same kind of intelligence across France, confirming me in my conclusions before noted. And ever since this period of 1796 we have never had any extraordinary alternation of extreme heat or wet, without its being to me the result of some accompanying volcanic agitation in Mount Hecla, or Mount Vesuvius, or its neighborhood. and the recurrence of the violent ebullition that has this year been going on at Mount Etna may therefore be considered as the electric cause not only of the extraordinary heat of our late summer, but also of the floods that have subsequently poured down upon us. It is only of late years that scientific men have paid due attention to these physical phenomena. Sir Humphrey Davy, I think, was the first who laid down their causes, and if we recollect the account given by Sir Stamford Raffles of the appalling effects of the tremendous explosion of Tambora, in Sambua, one of the islands east of Java, in the year 1815, described as so violent in its immediate neighborhood as to cause men, and horses, and trees to be taken up into the air like chaff, and of its effects being perceptible in Sumatra, where, nearly at 1,000 miles distance from it, they heard its thundering noisy explosions. Thinking of this, we may well exceed the comparatively small vibrations that we occasionally feel, as arising from the interchange of civilities passing between our volcanic neighbors Hecla and Vesuvius, or Etna, and glad we may be that we have them in no more inconvenient shape or degree than we have hitherto experienced them. I have some friends in Lancashire who have been a good deal alarmed by the vibrations they have lately experienced, and I must confess that my good wife and myself were, on the morning of the December 10th, not a little startled in our bed by a shock that aroused us early to inquire after the cause of it, but for which we cannot account otherwise than that, from its sudden electric character, the Lancashire vibration had reached us. The chief purport, however, of my present communication is, to make inquiry amongst your readers, whether any of them, like myself, have observed and experienced any recurrence of these concomitant and physical obtrusions. Mr. Noak. W.M. S. Heselden. W.M. S. Heselden. Barton upon Humber. Minor notes. Value of Mrs. In the cause of Calvert v. Seabright, a question arose as to the sale of a collection of manuscript books by the late Sir John Seabright in the year 1807. In aid of the inquiry before the master, as to the difference in value of the manuscripts in 1807 and the year 1849, Mr. Rodd made an affidavit, from which I have made the following extract, showing the prices at which 5 lots were sold in 1807, and the prices at which the same lots were sold at the late Mr. Heber's sale in 1836. No, in Catalogue 1185. Bracton de Hen. Consuet to Dinibus et Legibus Anglici. In Pergamena, Literis Deoratus. Sold in 1807 for 1L, 13s. Produced at Heber's sale, 1836 6L, 6s. Lot 1190. Ghoul. Malmesburiensis digestis regum Anglorum. In Pergamena. Sold in 1807 for 1L, 7s. Produced at Heber's sale, 1836 63L. Lot 1195. Chronica Guglielmi Thorn. In Membranes. Sold in 1807 for 12s. Produced at Heber's sale, 1836 85L. Lot 1198. Henrici Arcid. Huntindoniensis digestis Anglorum et gyre. Cambriensis expugnatio Hiberni. In Pergamena. Sold in 1807 for 2L, 1s. Produced at Heber's sale, 1836 78L, 15s, 60. Lot 1206. Chronica Mat. Paracensis sine Historia minor cum vita authoris, per doctissimum virum rog. Twisden bar. In Papyro. Sold in 1807 for 2L, 8s. Produced at Heber's sale, 1836 5L, 15s, 60. Total produce in 1807 8L, 1s. In 1836 238L, 17s. In the Catalogue of Heber's Books, and c. Numbers 447, 1006, 498, 118, and 1016, correspond with the numbers 1185, 1190, 1195, 1198, 1206. F. W. J. Robert Hill. I possess a Latin Bible which formerly belonged to this person, and contains many MS. notes in his handwriting. The following is by another hand. This book formerly belonged to Mr. Robert Hill, a tailor of Buckingham, and an acquaintance of my cousin John Herbert, surgeon of that town. J.L. In literature we find of this profession, i.e. that of a tailor, John Speed, a native of Cheshire, whose merit as an historian and antiquary are indisputable, to whom may be added the name of a man who in literature ought to have taken the lead, we mean John Stow. Benjamin Robins, the compiler of Lord Anson's Voyage, who united the powers of the sword and the pen, was professionally a tailor of Bath, as was Robert Hill of Buckingham, who, in the midst of poverty and distress, while obliged to labor at his trade for the support of a large family, acquired a knowledge of the Hebrew and other languages, such as has only been equaled by Maglia Becchi, who studied in a cradle curtained by cobwebs and colonized by spiders. C. Vestiges revived. No, XX. European Mag for Mar. 1813. The above choice note is, I presume, an extract from the Europe Mag, and may serve to show that although ordinarily it takes 9 tailors to make a man, it may occasionally require 9 men to make such a tailor as R. Hill seems to have been. B. H. C. English Orthography. The agricultural newspapers and magazines in the United States have generally restored the spelling of plow in place of plow, which has crept in since the translation of the Bible into English. Could not cloak, the old spelling, be also restored, in place of cloak, which has nothing but oak to keep it in countenance, whilst cloak is an analogy with smoke, poke, broke, and see. There are 2 English words, in pronouncing which not a single letter of them is sounded, namely you, yo, and I. Unada. Philadelphia. Bookselling in Glasgow in 1735. The following curious report of a law case appears in Morrison's Dictionary of the Decisions of the Court of Session, page 9455. It appears from it that, so late as 1735, the city of Glasgow, now containing a population of nearly 400,000, was considered too limited a sphere for the support of only 2 booksellers. 1735, January 15th. Stalker against Carmichael. Carmichael and Stalker entered into a co-partnery of bookselling within the city of Glasgow, to continue for 3 years, and because the place was judged too narrow for 2 booksellers at a time, it was stipulated that after the expiry of 3 years, either of them refusing to enter into a new contract upon the former terms, should be debarred from any concern in bookselling within the city of Glasgow. In a reduction of the contract, the Lords found the debarring clause in the contract is a lawful practice, and not contrary to the liberty of the subject. X.Y. Edinburgh. Epitaph on a Sexton. Epitaph on a sexton, who received a great blow by the clapper of a bell. Here lieth the body of honest John Capper, who lived by the bell, and died by the clapper. Answer to the foregoing. I am not dead indeed, but have good hope to live by the bell when you die by the rope. E. Queries. Eustache de Saint Pierre. With the siege of Calais, and its surrender to Edward III, in 1347, is associated the name of Eustache de Saint Pierre, whose loyalty and devotedness have been immortalized by the historian, and commemorated by the artist's pencil. The subject of Queen Philippa's intercessions on behalf of Eustache and his brave companions is, no doubt, familiar to most of your readers. The stern demeanor of the king, the tears and supplicating attitude of the Queen Philippa, and the humiliating position of the burgesses of Calais, and C. But what if Eustache de Saint Pierre had been bought over by King Edward? For without going the length of pronouncing the scenes of the worthy citizens, with halters round their necks, to have been a got-up affair, there is, however, some reason to doubt whether the boasted loyalty of Eustache de Saint Pierre was such as is represented, as will appear from the following notes. And however much the statements therein contained may detract from the cherished popular notions regarding Eustache de Saint Pierre, yet the seeker after truth is inexorable, or, to use the words of Sir Francis Palgrave, Hist. of Norm. N. I. 354, he is expected to uncramp or shatter the pedestals supporting the idols which have won the false worship of the multitude, so that they may nod in their niches, or topple down. In one of the volumes forming part of that valuable collection published by the French government, and commenced, I believe, under the auspices of M. Guizot, namely, the Documents and Edits sur l'Histoire de France, the following passage attracted my notice. Il.M. de Brequigny, approuve par de titers authentiques et en canoes jusqu'à présent, chu Eustache de St. Pierre, dont on a si fort vanté le dévouement pour les habitants de Calais, fut séduit par Edouard, et chu il recut de si prince de pensions et de possessions fort peu de temps après la prise de cette place, et ux conditions de y maintenir le bon ordre, et de la conserver à l'Angleterre. See Lettre de Royce, and C. Volume 1, Preface p. 6. The above statement is founded on a memoir read before the Académie de Belles Lettres by M. de Brequigny, respecting the researches made by him in London, cmem. De l'Académique. De Belles Lettres, tom. 37. Lingard throws a doubt over the matter. He says, Froissart has dramatized this incident with considerable effect, but I fear, with little attention to truth. Even in Froissart there is nothing to prove that Edward designed to put these men to death. On the contrary, he takes notice that the king's refusal of mercy was accompanied with a wink to his attendants, which, if it meant anything, must have meant that he was not acting seriously. Lingard, 3rd edit. 1825, Volume 4. Page 79, Note 85. Again in Hume. The story of the 6 burgesses of Calais, like all extraordinary stories, is somewhat to be suspected, and so much the more, as Avesbury, who is particular in his narrative of the surrender of Calais, says nothing of it, and on the contrary extols in general the king's generosity and lenity to the inhabitants. Hume Maiteville, 1807, Volume 2, Note H. Both Hume and Lingard mention that Edward expelled the natives of Calais, and repeopled the place with Englishmen, but they say nothing as to Eustache de St. Pierre becoming a pensioner of the king's. Et ux conditions de y maintenir le bon ordre, et de la conserver à l'Angleterre. Chateaubriand, Etudes Hist. 1831, 8 Ville, Tome 4. Page 104, gives Froissart's narrative, by which he abides, at the same time complaining of the esprit de dénigrement, which he says prevailed towards the end of the last century in regard to heroic actions. Regarding Queen Philippa's share in the transaction above referred to, M. de Brequigny says, La reine, qu'on suppose avoir été si touchy du malheur de 6 bourgeois dont elle venait de sauver la vie, n'y laissa pas d'y advenir, peu de jours après, la confiscation de maisons que Jean d'Acre, elle en Dieu, avait possédées dans Calais. Miss Strickland, Lives of Queens, 1st edit, Volume 2, page 336. Likewise gives the story as related by Froissart, but mentions the fact of Queen Philippa taking possession of Jean d'Acre's property, and the doubt cast upon Eustache's loyalty, but she would appear to justify him by reason of King Philip's abandoning the brave Calaisians to their fate. However this may be, documents exist proving that the inhabitants of Calais were indemnified for their losses, and whether or not the family of Eustache de St. Pierre approved his conduct, so much is certain, that, on the death of the latter, the property which had been granted to him by King Edward was confiscated, because they would not acknowledge their allegiance to the English. I wish to ask whether this new light thrown on the subject through M. de Brequigny's labors has been hitherto noticed, for it would appear the story should be rewritten. Philip S. King. Philip S. King. Devises Origin of, a question for the Heralds. I will put the following case as briefly as I can. Throughout the medieval ages, the word devise formed the generic term for every species of emblazonment. Thus we have devises heroiques, per Claude Paradin, Lyons, 1557, devises et emblems d'amour moralises, par Flamen, the Paradise of Dainty Devices, 1576, Minerva Britannica, or a garden of heroical devices furnished and adorned with emblems and impresses of sundry natives, newly devised, moralist, and published by Henry Peacham, 1612. And lastly, Henry Estienne's Discourse of Hieroglyphs, Symbols, Gryphs, Emblems, Enigmas, Sentences, Parables, Reverses of Medals, Arms, Blazons, Simiars, Ciphers, and Rebus, which learned discourse, be it observed, is entitled The Art of Making Devises, 1646. As an additional proof that device included the motto, take the following. Henry III. commanded to be written by way of device in his chamber at Woodstock, can non dat quadamat non accipit al quad optat. Quoted by Sir Agar Bridges. Here I must stop, though I could add many illustrations, and go on to observe that whereas all the explanations which I have ever met with, of the unique appellation of Castrum Divisarum, or the Castle of Devises, are totally unhistoric, if not ridiculous, I crave the attention of all whom it may concern to a new solution of the difficulty. First, then, in order to clear the way, I would observe that if, as commonly stated, the name had signified a frontier fort, would it not have been called the Castle of the Division, singular, rather than the Castle of the Divided Districts? In other words, why make it a plural term? Secondly, if, as I surmise, the Italian word divisa bore at the time of the conquest its present meaning of device, in greater force than the sense of divisions or partitions, is it unreasonable to suppose that Castrum Divisarum implied and constituted, at that early period, the deposit or fountainhead of the blazonry of the Norman leaders? It was certainly not unsuited for such a species of herald's college, being central, inland, a royal treasury, and the frequent scene of a court. When in the ensuing age reedified by Bishop Roger, the monkish historians, without a dissentient voice, proclaimed it the most splendid castle in the realm, and though it may be objected that this observation belongs to a date not to our purpose, yet the pre-existence of the fortress is proved by its having been the temporary prison of Duke Robert. I am aware that such a notion as devises having formed the nucleus of the tree heraldic in England is not countenanced, nor even suspected, by any of the popular writers on the art. I may add that one gentleman, holding an important position therein, has signified his disapproval of so early an origin being assigned to the institution. But over against this, I beg to parade a passage from a letter written by Thomas Bloor in 1806 to Sir Egerton Bridges. The heralds, says he, seem originally not to have been instituted for the manufacturing of armorial ensigns, but for the recording those ensigns which had been born. Censura Literaria, Volume 3. Page 254. My case is now stated. I shall be well content that some of your archaeological friends should scatter it to the winds, provided they will explain how it is that Devises, in common with some of the ancient cities of Egypt and Greece, has so long rejoiced in a plural name. To aid this last endeavor, I close with one more statement. The castle stood nearly midway between two other adjoining towns or villi, also bearing plural names, Paterni equals Arum, Pasterni, and Caningi equals Arum. J. Wayland. J. Wayland. P.S. I think I may plead the privilege of a postscript for the purpose of recording what may be taken as an indication, though perhaps not a proof, that the idea of devices or contrivances was implied in the name so recently as the period of the Civil War. The Mercurius Civicus, a parliamentary paper, 1644, states that Devizes was being garrisoned for the king, in the following terms. Hopton is fortifying a main at the Devizes in Wiltshire, but I fear greater fortifyings for the Devices in Oxford. Minor queries. Gold signet ring. I possess an ancient gold signet ring, which was dug up a few years since not far from an old entrenchment in the borough of Leominster, in the county of Hereford, the device thereon being a cock. It is of very pure metal, and weighs 155 grains. It is in fine preservation, and device is rudely cut, but I beg to enclose an impression from which you may judge. Can any of your antiquarian readers throw any light on the subject to whom this device originally belonged? In leveling the fortified entrenchment above referred to some half-century ago, various utensils of pottery, burned bones, spear and arrowheads, tessellated tiles, fragments of sculptured stones, and other relics of antiquity, were found. J. B. Wibborn. J. B. Wibborn. Ecclesia Anglicana. I observe, in an interesting letter published in the December number of the Ecclesiologist, in an enumeration of service books belonging to the English Church before the Reformation, and now existing in the Pepisian Library, Cambridge, the following title. Number 1198. Servitium de omni officio episcopali concernenta, sic chorum, secundum usum ecclesiae Anglicane. Now I am anxious to know from any of your readers, who are better informed on these subjects than I am, or who have access to old libraries, whether Ecclesia Anglicana is a usual designation of the Catholic Church in England before the Reformation. Service books according to the use of some particular cathedral church are of course well known, as in this same list to which I have referred we find Secundum usum insignis ecclesiabricensis, ad insignis ecclesiae Salisburyensis usum, and c. But I should be glad to learn, in these days of ultramontane pretensions, whether, even prior to the Reformation, the distinct nationality of the Anglican Church was commonly asserted by the use of such a title in her service books. I need scarcely observe how many interesting cognate questions might be asked on this subject. G. R. M. Tangiers. English Army in 1684. A merchant in 1709 deposed that he knew not how long complainant had been a soldier, or beyond the seas before May, 1697, but that he has heretofore seen and knew him at Tambre, before and at the time of the demolishing thereof, being then a soldier, and no doubt could prove that he was in England a considerable time next before May, 1697. Could the place be other than Tangiers, destroyed in 1684? Was complainant, a younger son of a well-connected family of gentry, but himself probably in poverty, who in deeds, and on his Mon tablet, is described as gent, likely to have been in 1684, aged 27, a private, a non-commissioned, or commissioned officer? If the latter, would he not have been so described? A. C. Smith. Of what family was Smith, confessor of Catherine of Braganza, buried in York Minster? And what are the arms on his tomb? Where can information be obtained as to a Judge Smith, supposed to have been of the same family? A. F. B. Dis. Termination. Itis. What is the derivation of the termination? Itis. Used principally in medical words, and these signifying inflammation, as pleuritis, vulgo pleurisy, inflammation of the pleura, and c. Adsum. Adsum. Locen. In 2 or more parishes in Norfolk was a custom, or modus, of paying a locen in lieu of tithes of fowls and eggs. I shall feel obliged to any of your correspondents who can inform me what constituted a locen. G. J. Etymological traces of the social position of our ancestors. I remember reading an account of the traces of the social position of our Saxon ancestors yet remaining in our English customs, which interested me much at the time, and which I would gladly again refer to, as, Captain Cuttle's invaluable maxim not being then extant, I neglected making a note of it. It described the Norman derivation of the names of all kinds of meat, as beef, mutton, veal, venison, and c., while the corresponding animals still retained their original Saxon appellations ox, sheep, calf, and c., and it accounted for this by the fact that while the animals were under the care of the Saxon thralls and herdsmen, they retained of course their Saxon names. But when served up at the tables of their Norman lords, it became necessary to name them afresh. I think the word Herensos, cf. Volume 3, pages 450. 207, Volume 4, page 76, is another example, which are called Harnsies at this day in Norfolk, as it is difficult, on any other supposition, to account for an East Anglian giving a French appellation to so common a bird as the heron. E. S. Taylor. E. S. Taylor. Locke's Writings. In an unpublished manuscript of Paley's Lectures on Locke's essay, it is stated that so great was the antipathy against the writings of this eminent philosopher, at the time they were first issued, that they were burned at Oxford by the hands of the common hangman. Is this fact recorded in any life of Locke, or how may it be ascertained? There is no notice of it, I believe, in either Law's Life, or in that of Lord King. George Munford. George Munford. East Winch. Passage in Goths. Faust. Has the following passage from the second part of Faust ever been noticed in connection with the fact that the clock in Goth's chamber stopped at the moment that he himself expired? If it has not, I shall congratulate myself on having been the first to point out this very curious coincidence. Mephistopheles. Die Zeit word her, der Gries hier liegt im Sand. Dire steht still. Chorus. Steht still. Sie schweit wie Mitternacht. Der Zeiger fault. Mephistopheles. A fault, yes, ist vollbracht. Faust, der Tragedies Thiel, Fünfter Act. W. Fraser. W. Fraser. Schomburgk's Epitaph by Swift. A correspondent asks whether the epitaph alluded to in the following extract from the Daily Courant of July 17, 1731, is given in any edition of Swift's works. The Latin inscription, composed by the Rev. Dr. Swift, Dean of St. Patrick's, and ordered by the Dean and Chapter to be fixed up in the cathedral of the said church, over the place where the body of the great Duke of Schomburg lies, has been with all possible care and elegance engraved on a beautiful table of black Kilkenny marble, about 8 feet long and 4 or 5 broad. The letters are gilded, and the whole is now finished with the utmost neatness. People of all ranks are continually crowding to see it, and the inscription is universally admired. The Daily Gazetteer of Saturday, July 12, 1740, gives a detailed account of the rejoicings in Dublin on the Tuesday preceding, being the anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne, and a particular account of the bonfire made by Dean Swift in St. Kevin Street, near the Watch House. The burial service said by Hart. Bishop Spratt, in his Discourse to his Clergy, 1695, for which see Clergyman's Instructor, 1827, page 245, relates that, immediately after the Restoration, a noted ringleader of schism in the former times was interred in one of the principal churches of London, and that the minister of the parish, being a wise and regular conformist, and afterwards an eminent bishop, delivered the whole office of burial by Hart on that occasion. The friends of the deceased were greatly edified at first, but afterwards much surprised and confounded when they found that their fervent admiration had been bestowed on a portion of the common prayer. Southey, Commonplace Book 3. 492, conjectures that the minister was Bull. This cannot be, for Bull, I believe, never held a London cure. Was it Hackett? And who was the noted ringleader of schism? J.K. Shaw's Staffordshire Mrs. Can any of your Staffordshire correspondents furnish information as to the present depository of the Rev. Stebbing Shaw's Staffordshire Mrs. and the M.S. notes of Dr. Thomas Harwood used in his 2 editions of Earnswick's Staffordshire? And can they refer to a pedigree of Thomas Wood, Esq., Lord Chief Justice of the Common Pleas, 1501, who is said to have built Hall Owood, in Batterley, near Botley, Staffordshire? N.C.L. Ne'er to these chambers. N.C. Ne'er to these chambers where the mighty rest. Since their foundation came a nobler guest, nor to th immortal entrance e'er conveyed a loftier spirit, or more welcome shade. Where do these lines come from? Aram. Swillington. County History Societies. I would suggest the idea whether county history societies might not be formed with advantage, as there are so many counties which have never had their histories written. They are very expensive and laborious for individuals to undertake, and constantly require additions on account of the many changes which are taking place. To make them complete as works of reference for the present time, I think that by the means suggested they might be made very useful, particularly if complete statistical tables were annexed to the general and descriptive account. With comparatively little expense, the history and statistics of every county could be brought down to the latest date, making a valuable work of reference to which all could refer with confidence for the information which is constantly being sought for. G.H. Hugh Oldham, Bishop of Exeter. Is any pedigree extant of the family of Hugh Oldham? Bain speaks of him, Hist. of Lank, Volume 2, page 579, as descended from an ancient family, born, according to Wood and Godwin, at Manchester, but, according to Dodsworth, at Oldham. What arms did he adopt? J.B. The English Domestic Novel. My first intention was to ask whether Defoe was the founder of this pleasing class of literature, but have just recollected that Mrs. Aphra Behn wrote something of the kind in the time of Charles II. My first question will be, therefore, who was the earliest writer of this description? And secondly, is not the matter of sufficient interest to ask your reader's assistance in the formation of a list, giving full titles, authors' names, and dates extending to 1730 or 1750? John Milland. Dr. Young. In the most authentic biographical accounts we leave of Dr. Young the poet, It is stated that he left in the hands of his housekeeper a collection of manuscript sermons, with an injunction that after his death they should be destroyed. It is also added that this request was only complied with in part. Can any of your correspondents confirm the hope that these sermons may still be in existence? And if so, in what quarter information may be obtained concerning them? The housekeeper is said to have been the widow of a clergyman, and therefore was not regarded by the doctor in the light of a servant. J.H. Cambridge. Bishop Hall's Meditations. I have an old copy before me, the title page of which runs as follows: Occasional Meditations by Jos. Exon. Set forth by R. H. The third edition, with the addition of 49 meditations not heretofore published, London, printed by M. F. For Nathaniel Butter, 1633. It is edited by Bishop Hall's son, Robert. I should be glad to learn whether this is a scarce edition. Beaticus. Beaticus. Edgemond Salop. Chatterton. Dr. Gregory, in his Life of Chatterton, page 100. Reprinted by Southey in the first volume of his edition of Chatterton's works, page 70, says, Chatterton, as appears by the coroner's inquest, swallowed arsenic in water, on the 24th of August 1770, and died in consequence thereof the next day. Mr. Barrett, the historian of Bristol, one of Chatterton's best friends and patrons, who, from his profession as a surgeon, was likely to have made, and seems to have made, inquiries as to the circumstances of his death, says, in his History of Bristol, not published before 1789, and therefore not misled by any false first report, that Chatterton's principles impelled him to become his own executioner. He took a large dose of opium, some of which was picked out from his teeth after his death, and he was found the next morning a most horrid spectacle, with limbs and features distorted as after convulsions, a frightful and ghastly corpse. Page 647. I do not know whether this contradiction has ever been noticed, and shall be obliged to any correspondent who can give me information. I believe that Sir Herbert Croft's Love and Madness was the authority followed by Dr. Gregory, but I have not the book. N.B. Passage in Job. The wonderful and sublime Book of Job, authenticated by subsequent divine records, and about 3,400 years old, is very probably the most ancient writing in the world, and though life and immortality were especially reserved as the glorious gift and revelation of our blessed Redeemer, the eternal author and finisher of our salvation, yet Job was permitted to declare his deep conviction that he should rise from the dead and see God. This memorable declaration, chapter 19, ver. 25, can be forgotten by none of your readers, but some of them may not know that the Septuagint adds these words of life to chapter 42. Ver. 17, Gamma gamma rho alpha pi tau phi iota delta epsilon, upsilon tau nu pi lambda iota nu alpha sigma tau sigma epsilon sigma theta alpha iota mu epsilon theta nu kappa rho iota omicron nu sigma iota sigma iota nu. But it is written that he shall rise again with those whom the Lord riseth up. Gamma gamma rho alpha pi tau phi iota delta epsilon, upsilon tau nu pi lambda iota nu alpha sigma tau sigma epsilon sigma theta alpha iota mu epsilon theta nu kappa rho iota omicron nu sigma iota sigma iota nu. Our authorized and truly admirable translation of the Holy Scriptures omits this deeply important conclusion of Job's life, so properly noticed by the learned and excellent Parkhurst. Pray, can you or any of your readers explain the cause of this omission? As your pages have not been silent on the grand consummation which cannot be too constantly before us, I do not apologize for this very short addition to your notes. Edwin Jones. Edwin Jones. South Sea Hants. Return. This passage was originally printed. Gamma gamma rho alpha pi tau phi iota, sigma epsilon alpha upsilon tau nu. It was corrected by an erratum in next issue, transcriber. Gamma gamma rho alpha pi tau phi iota, sigma epsilon alpha upsilon tau nu. Turner's View of Lambeth Palace. In a newspaper memoir of the late Mr. Turner, R.A., published shortly after his death, it was stated that the first work exhibited by him at Somerset House was a view of Lambeth Palace. I believe in watercolors. I should be glad to ascertain, through your columns, if this picture be still in existence, and in what collection. L. E. X. Clark's essay on the usefulness of mathematical learning. Can any of the readers of N&Q assist me in obtaining a copy of this work? In the same author's Rationale of Circulating Numbers, Murray, London, 1778, it is stated that the demonstrations of all the theorems and problems at the end of the Rev. John Lawson's dissertation on the geometrical analysis of the ancients will be given at the latter end of an essay on the usefulness of mathematical learning, which will soon be published. In a subsequent portion of the work, a sketch of the contents of the essay is given, which include a treatise on magic squares, translated from the French of Frenicle, as published in Les Ouvrages de Mathématiques par Messrs de l'Académie Royale des Sciences, with several additions and remarks, and in a list of tracts and translations written and published by H. Clark, Doctor of Laws, which occurs at the end of my copy of the first volume of Leibniz Mathematical Repository, London, 1805. The essay appears as number 10, and is stated to have been published in 8 vo, at 6 shillings. None of my friends are acquainted with the work, but if the preceding description will enable any reader to help me to a copy, I shall esteem it a great favor. T. Wilkinson. T. Wilkinson. Burnley, Lancashire. The General Pardon. An imperfect copy of a small tract, measuring 5½ inches by 3½ inches, has recently come into my hands, of which I much desire to obtain the wanting parts. It is entitled The General Pardon, due in Lungigan, and signed newly confirmed by our Almighty Father, with many large preeuloges, grunts, and Buell's grunt for ewer, as is to be seen hereafter, drawn out of French into English. By William Hayward. Imprinted at London by William Howe for William Pickeringa. There is no date, but it is believed to have been printed in or about 1571. It is in black letter, and is in imitation of the Roman Catholic pardons. It consists of 12 leaves. In my copy the last 7 of these are torn through their middle vertically. I have not been able to meet with this tract in the catalogues of any of the great libraries which I have consulted, e.g. the British Museum, Bodleian, Cambridge University, Lambeth, and several of the college libraries at Cambridge. I want any information concerning it, or its original in French, which the readers of N&Q can give, also access to a copy from which to transcribe the parts wanting in mine. Charles C. Babington. Charles C. Babington. St. John's Call. Cambridge. Minor Queries with Answers. Edward the Confessor's Rings. There is an old legend of a ring given to one of our early kings, I think Edward the Confessor, by some saintly or angelic messenger. If any of your readers could give me any of the details of this story, it would very much oblige your constant reader. M.J.T. The following extract from Taylor's Glory of Regality, pages 74, etc., will give our correspondent the legend referred to. The ring with which our kings are invested, called by some writers the wedding ring of England, is illustrated, like the ampulla, by a miraculous history, of which the following are the leading particulars. From the Golden Legend, Julian Notary, 1503, page 187. Edward the Confessor being one day asked for alms by a certain fair old man, the king found nothing to give him except his ring, with which the poor man thankfully departed. Some time after, 2 English pilgrims in the Holy Land having lost their road, as they travelled at the close of the day, there came to them a fair ancient man with white hair for age. Then the old man asked them what they were and of what region. And they answered that they were pilgrims of England, and had lost their fellowship and way also. Then this old man comforted them goodly, and brought them into a fair city, and when they had well refreshed them, and rested them a la nyght. On the morn, this fair old man went with them and brought them in the ryght way again. And he was glad to hear them talk of the welfare and holiness of their king Saint Edward. And when he should depart fro them, then he told them what he was, and said, I am Johann the Evangelist, and say ye unto Edward your king, that I greta hym well by the token that he goff to me these ringe with his one hands, whych ringe ye shall deliver to hym again. And when he had delivered to them the ring, he departed from them suddenly. This command, as may be supposed, was punctually obeyed by the messengers, who were furnished with ample powers for authenticating their mission. The ring was received by the royal confessor, and in after times was preserved with due care at his shrine in the Abbey of Westminster. The Bourbons. What was the origin of the Bourbon family? How did Henry IV come to be the next heir to the throne on the extinction of the line of Valois? E.H.A. Henri IV, King of Navarre, succeeded to the throne on the extinction of the House of Valois, as the head of the House of Bourbon, which descends from Robert of France, Count de Clermont, the fifth son of St. Louis, and Seigneur de Bourbon. On the death of Louis I, in 1341, leaving two sons, this house was divided into the Bourbon, or elder branch, which became extinct on the death of the Constable of Bourbon, in 1527, and the younger branch, or that of the Counts de la Marque, afterwards Counts and Dukes of Vendôme. Henri was the son of Antoine de Bourbon, Duc de Vendôme. Replies. Emblems. Volume 6, page 460. The query confirms Professor de Morgan's excellent article in the companion to the Almanac for 1853. On the difficulty of correct description of books. The manuscript note cited by H.J., though curiously inaccurate, guided me to the book for which he inquires. I copy the title page. Die Betrub Pegnasis, den Leben, Kunst, und Tugendwandel des Seligedem Floridens, H. Sigm. Von Birken Kompal. Cause. Durch 24 Sinnbilder in Kupfern, zur Schuldigen Nachar Fürsteland, und mit Gesprach und Reimgedichten Erklärend, durch ihr Blumenhirten. Nuremberg, 1684, 12 mo. I presume the annotator, not understanding German, and seeing Floridens, the most conspicuous word on the title page, cited him as the author, but it is the pastoral academic name of the late Herr Sigmund von Birken, in whose honor the work is composed. The emblem, with the motto, Bis Fracta Relinker, at page 249, not 240, is a tree from which two boughs are broken. It illustrates the death of Floridens' second wife, and his determination not to take a third. The chessboard, plate 14, page 202, has the motto, Per tot discrimina rerum, and commemorates Floridens' safe return to Nuremberg after the multitudinous perils, Die Skaren der Gefahren, of a journey through Lower Saxony. They must have been great, if typified by the state of the board, on which only a black king and a white bishop are left, a chess problem. I bought my copy at a book sale many years ago, and, after reading a few pages, laid it aside as insufferably dull, although it was marked by its former possessor, the Rev. Henry White, of Lichfield. Very rare, probably unique. On taking it up to answer H.J.'s query, I found some matter relating to the German academies of the 17th century, which I think may be interesting. Mr. Hallam, Literature of Europe 4. v. 9 says, 4. The Arcadians determined to assume every one a pastoral name and a Greek birthplace, to hold their meetings in some verdant meadow, and to mingle with all their own compositions, as far as possible, images from pastoral life, images always agreeable, because they recall the times of primitive innocence. The poetical tribe adopted as their device the pipe of 7 reeds bound with laurel, and their president, or director, was denominated General Shepherd or Keeper, Custo General. He slightly mentions the German academics of the 16th century, 3. 930, and says, 3. It is probable that religious animosities stood in the way of such institutions, or they may have flourished without obtaining much celebrity. The Academy of Pegnitz Shepherds, Pegnitz Schäferorden, took its name from the little river Pegnitz which runs through Nuremberg. Herr Sigmund von Birken was elected a member in 1645. He chose Floridan as his pastoral name, and the amaranth as his flower. In 1658 he was admitted to the Palm Academy, Palmenorden, choosing the name der Erwachsene, the adult, and the Snowdrop. In 1659, a vacancy having occurred in the Pegnitz herdsman, Pegnitz-Hirten, he was thought worthy to fill it, and in 1679 he received the diploma of the Venetian Order of the Recuperati. He died in 1681. This, and what can be hung upon it, is Die Betrub Pegnitz, a dialogue of 406 pages. It opens with a meeting of shepherds and shepherdesses, who go in and out of their cottages on the banks of the Pegnitz, and tell one another, what all seem equally well acquainted with, the entire life of their deceased friend. It would not be easy to find a work more clumsy in conception and tasteless in execution. Herr von Birken seems to have been a prosperous man, and to have enjoyed a high pastoral reputation. His works are enumerated, but the catalogue looks ephemeral. There is, however, one with a promising title, Die Trocking Trunkenheit, oder die Gebrauchsgesunde Missbrauch des Tabaks. His portrait, as Der Watchscene, is prefixed. It has not a shepherd-like look. He seems about 50, with a fat face, lace cravat, and large flowing wig. There are 24 emblematical plates, rather below the average of their time. As so secondary a town as Nuremberg had at least 3 academies, we may infer that such institutions were abundant in Germany. In the 17th century, that of the Pegnitz shepherds lasted at least till the beginning of the 18th. In Der Thoricht Pritzmeister, a comedy printed at Koblenz, 1704, one of the characters is Fantasserend ein Pegnitz Schäfer, who talks fustian and is made ridiculous throughout. The comedy is Von Menantes. I have another work by the same author, Galanti, Verliet, und Satirisch Gedicht, Hamburg, 1704. I shall be very glad to be told who he was, as his versification is often very good, and his jokes, though not graceful, and not very laughable, are real. H. B. C. U. Club. Marriages and Chemise. Mantelkinder. Legitimation. Volume 6. Pages 485. 561. The popular error on the legal effect of marriage and chemise is, I think, noticed among other vulgar errors in law in a little book published some 20 years ago under the name of Westminster Hall, to which a deceased lawyer of eminence, then young at the bar, was a contributor. I believe the opinion to be still extensively prevalent, and to be probably founded, not exactly in total ignorance, but in a misconception of the law. The text writers inform us that the husband is liable for the wife's debts, because he acquires an absolute interest in the personal estate of the wife. And c. Bacon's abridgment, tit. Baron and femme. Now an unlearned person, who hears this doctrine, might reasonably conclude that if his bride has no estate at all, he will incur no liability, and the future husband, more prudent than refined, might think it as well to notify to his neighbors, by an unequivocal symbol, that he took no pecuniary benefit with his wife, and therefore expected to be free from her pecuniary burdens. In this, as in most other popular errors, there is found a substratum of reason. With regard to the other vulgar error, noticed at the foot of Mr. Brooks' communication, page 561, that all children under the girdle at the time of marriage are legitimate. The origin of it is more obvious. Every one knows of the legitimatio per subsequens matrimonium of the canonists, and how the barons assembled in Parliament at Merton refused to engraft this law of the Church on the jurisprudence of England. But it is not perhaps so well known that, upon such a marriage, the premature offspring of the bride and bridegroom sometimes used to perform a part in the ceremony, and receive the nuptial benediction under the veil, or mantle of the bride or the pallium of the altar. Hence the children so legitimated are said to have been called by the Germans Mantelkinder. The learning on this head is to be found in Hammel's Jurisprudentia Numismatibus Illustrata, Lipsi, 1763, pages 214 to 218, where the reader will also find a pictorial illustration of the ceremony from a codex of the Novelli in the library of Christian Schwartz. The practice seems to have been borrowed from the form of adopting children, noticed in the same work and in Ducange, verb. Pallium, palio cuperier, and in Grimm's Deuteronomy Rex Alterth. Page 465. Mr. Brooks. Let me add a word on the famous negative given to the demand of the clergy at Merton. No reason was assigned, or, at least, has been recorded, but a general unwillingness to change the laws of England. As the same barons did in fact consent to change them in other particulars, this can hardly have been the reason. Sir W. Blackstone speaks of the consequent uncertainty of heirship and discouragement of matrimony as among the causes of rejection, arguments of very questionable weight. Others, as Bishop Hurd, in his Dialogues, have attributed the rejection to the constitutional repugnance of the barons to the general principles of the canon and imperial law, which the proposed change might have tended to introduce, a degree of forethought, and a range of political vision for which I can hardly give them credit, especially as the great legal authority of that day, Bracton, has borrowed the best part of his celebrated treatise from the Corpus Juris. The most plausible motive which I have yet heard assigned for this famous parliamentary negative on the bishop's bill at Merton is suggested, quod minimi reris, in an Assistant Pro Law Commissioner's Report, Volume 6, of the 8 vo. Printed series, viz. that bastardy multiplied the escheats which accrued to medieval lords of manors. Smirk. Smirk. A venerable person whose mind is richly stored with shreds and patches of folklore and local antiquities, on seeing the curious marriage entry, page 485, has furnished me with the following explanation. It is the popular belief at Curtin in Lindsey that if a woman, who has contracted debts previous to her marriage, leave her residence in a state of nudity, and go to that of her future husband, he the husband will not be liable for any such debts. A case of this kind actually occurred in that highly civilized town within my informant's memory, the woman leaving her house from a bedroom window, and putting on some clothes as she stood on the top of the ladder by which she accomplished her descent. K.P.D.E. In that amusing work, Burns' History of the Fleet Marriages, page 77, occurs the following entry. The woman ran across Ludgate Hill in her shift, to which the editor has added this note. The Daily Journal of November 8, 1725, mentions a similar exhibition at Ulcombe in Kent. It was a vulgar error that a man was not liable to the bride's debts, if he took her in no other apparel than her shift. J.Y. Saffron Walden. Editions of the Prayer Book prior to 1662. Volume 6. Pages 435. 564. As Mr. Sparrow Simpson invites additions to his list from all quarters, I send him my contribution, and as I see that he has included translations of our liturgy into other languages, I do the same. Mr. Sparrow Simpson, 1552, Worcester. Joe. Oswin. Folio. 1560, London. Jug and Cawood. 4-2. 1565, London. Jug and Cawood. 8 vo. 1607, London. Folio. 1629, London. Folio. 1629, Cambridge. Folio. 1632, London. 4-2. 1633, London. 4-2. 1634, London. Folio. 1635, London. 4-2. 1638, Cambridge. 4-2. 1639, London. Folio. 1641, London. 4-2. 1660, Cambridge. Folio. 1644, The Scotch, by Laud and the Scotch Bishops. Printed by John Jones. 8 vo. 1551, Latine Versa, per Alex. Absium. Lipsy. 4-2. 1594, London. 8 vo. Essay. By Reginald Wolfe. London. 4-2. Essay. 1638, in Greek. London. 8 vo. 1616, in French. London. 4-2. 1608, in Irish. Dublin. Folio. 1612, in Spanish. London. 4-2. 1621, in Welsh. London. 4-2. All the foregoing editions are in the Bodleian Library. I may add to them the following 3. 1. 1551. Dublin, by Humphrey Powell. Folio. 2. 1617. Dublin. Company of Stationers. 4-2. 3. 1637. Dublin. The first of these, which is the first book printed in Ireland, is extremely rare. I believe only 2 copies are certainly known to exist, one of which is in the library of Trinity College, Dublin, and the other in that of Emmanuel College, Cambridge. Both are in very fine condition. The second is in my possession. The book is quite perfect, but some wiseacre has carefully erased the date. The almanac for 26 years tells nothing, being for the years 1603 to 1628. But the book contains a prayer for Frederick, the Prince Elector Palatine, and the Lady Elizabeth, his wife, with their hopeful issue. He married the princess in 1613, and in 1619 he was elected King of Bohemia, and thenceforward would be prayed for under his higher title. If the Sunday letter in the calendar is to be trusted, the book was printed, according to De Morgan's Book of Almanacs, in 1617. The Dublin Society of Stationers was established in that year, and it is not unlikely that they commenced their issues with a prayer book. I have never seen nor heard of another copy, with which I might compare mine, and thus ascertain its date. The third, of 1637, is reported, but I have never met with it. H. Cotton. H. Cotton. Thos. Etymology of Pearl. Volume 6, page 578. The inquiry of your correspondent Ifigfowl respecting the etymology of the word pearl does not admit of a simple answer. The word occurs in all the modern languages, both Romance and Teutonic, perla, idle and span, pearl, French and German, whence the English pearl. Adelung V. believes the word to be of Teutonic origin, and considers it as the diminutive of beer, a berry. Others derive it from perna, the Latin name of a shellfish, see Ducangen Perli, Diaz, Grammatic der Romanischen Sprachen, Volume 1, page 235. Neither of these derivations is probable. It is not shown that beer had a diminutive form, and perna was a local and obscure name, see Pliny, N. H. 32. Ad fin. Salmasius, Exercit. Plin, page 40. Edition 1689, thinks that perla is formed from perla, for sperula, the diminutive of sphera. A more probable origin is that the word is formed from the Latin pyrum, as suggested by Diaz, in allusion to the pear-shaped form of the pearl. Ducangen V. says that the extremity of the nose was called perula nasi, from its resemblance to the form of a pear. But pyrus was used to denote a boundary stone, made in a pyramidal shape, Ducangen V., and this seems to have been the origin of the singular expression perula nasi, as being something at the extremity. Another supposition is that the word perla is derived from the Latin perula, the diminutive of pera, a wallet. A wallet was a small bag hung round the neck, and the word perula, in the sense of a small bag, occurs in Seneca and Apuleius. The analogy of shape and mode of wearing is sufficiently close to suggest the transfer of the name. Perla and perilous are used in Low Latin in the sense of pearl. Ducange cites a passage from a hagiographer, where perla means the white of the eye, evidently alluding to the color of the pearl. Ifigfowl. The choice seems to lie between perla as the diminutive of pera or of pyrum. Neither derivation is improbable. It is to be observed that the modern Italian form of pyrum, the fruit of the pear, is pera, the modern feminine noun being, as in numerous other cases, formed from the plural of the Latin neuter noun, see Diaz, IB Volume 2. Page 19. The analogy of unio, to which I shall advert presently, supports the derivation from the fruit. The derivation from pera, a wallet, is, on merely linguistical grounds, preferable. The Greek name of pearl is Myophrogamophrotauida, originally applied to a precious stone, and apparently molded out of some Oriental name, into a form suited to the Greek pronunciation. Scott and Liddell in V. derive it from the Persian mawari. Pliny H. N. 9. 56, speaking of the pearl, says, Apud Grecos non est, any apud barbaros cadem inventors aegis, aliad quam margariti. The Greek name margarita was used by the Romans, but the proper Latin name for the pearl was unio. Pliny Ibid explains this word by saying that each pearl is unique, and unlike every other pearl. Ammianus Marcellinus, Lib 23. Ad fin. Thinks that pearls were called unions, because the best were found single in the shell, Solinus c. 53, because they were always found single. The more homely explanation of Salmasius seems, however, to be the true one, namely, that the common word for an onion, growing in a single bulb, was transferred to the pearl, exercit. Plin, pages 822-4, Columella de R. 12. 10. The ancient meaning of unio is still preserved in the French ognon. Muelfro gamalfro taita. L. Your correspondent asks the etymon of our English word pearl. It would not be uninteresting to learn, at the same time, at what period pearl came into general use as an English word. Burton, who wrote his Anatomy in the reign of James I, uses the word union, from the Latin unio, instead of pearl, Anatomy Melanch, Volume 2. Part 2, Sector 3, Mem. 3, and IB, page 2, Sector 4, Mem. 1, subs. 4. In the latter passage he says, those smaller unions which are found in shells, amongst the Persians and Indians, are very cordial, and most part avail to the exhilaration of the heart. The Latin term unio differs from margarita, in so far as it seems to have been applied by Pliny to distinguish the small and ill-shaped pearls, from the large, round, and perfect, which he calls margariti, and in his 9th book, c. 59, he defines the difference philologically, as well as philosophically. Philemon Holland, who published his translation of Pliny in 1634, about 13 years after Burton published the first edition of his Anatomy, uses the word pearl indifferently as the equivalent both of margarita and unio. Query, was the word union generally received in England instead of pearl in Burton's time, and when did it give place to it? J. Emerson Tennant. J. Emerson Tennant. Martin Drunk. Volume 5, page 587. Has not the following song something to do with the expression, Martin Drunk? It is certainly contemporary with Thomas Nash the Elizabethan satirist, and was long a favorite. Three Man's Song. It is copied from Bitter Amelia, or the second part of Music's Melody, 4-2, 1609. Martin said to his man? Martin said to his man? Fie! Man, fie! Oh, Martin said to his man. Who's the full now? Martin said to his man. Fill thou the cup, and I the can. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the full now? I see a sheep shearing corn. Fie! Man, fie! I see a sheep shearing corn. Who's the full now? I see a sheep shearing corn. And a cuckold blow his horn. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the full now? I see a man in the moon. Fie! Man, fie! I see a man in the moon. Who's the full now? I see a man in the moon. Clouding of St. Peter's show one. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the full now? I see a hare chase a hound. Fie! Man, fie! I see a hare chase a hound. Who's the full now? I see a hare chase a hound. 20 mile above the ground. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the full now? I see a goose ring a hog. Fie! Man, fie! I see a goose ring a hog. Who's the full now? I see a goose ring a hog. And a snail that did bite a dog. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the full now? I see a mouse catch the cat. Fie! Man, fie! I see a mouse catch the cat. Who's the full now? I see a mouse catch the cat. And the cheese to eat the rat. Thou hast well drunken, man. Who's the full now? Edward F. Rimbault. Edward F. Rimbault. Goth's reply to Nicolai. Volume 6, page 434. Had M.E. gone to the fountainhead and consulted Goth's own statement in his autobiography, he would have seen in the Werke, volume 26, page 229, that Mr. Hayward's note was not written with that writer's usual care. Goth does not say that his reply to Nicolai's Joys of Werther, though circulated only in MS, destroyed N.S. literary reputation. On the contrary, he says that his squib, for it was no more, consisted of an epigram, not fit for communication, and a dialogue between Charlotte and Werther, which was never copied, and long lost, but that this dialogue, exposing N.S. impertinence, was written with a foreboding of his sad habit, afterwards developed, of treating of subjects out of his depth, which, Habit, notwithstanding his indisputable merits of another kind, utterly destroyed his reputation. This was most true, and yet all such assertions must be taken in a qualified sense. Nearly 30 years after this was written, I partook of the hospitality of N. at Berlin. It was in 1803, when he was at the head, not of the Berlin literati, but of the book manufactory of Prussia. He was then what, afterwards and elsewhere, the Longmans, Mies, Constables, Cottas, and Brockhouses were, the great publisher of his age and country. The entrepreneur of the Neue Deutsche Bibliothek may be compared with the publishers of our and the French great cyclopedias, and our quarterly reviews. It was unfortunate for the posthumous reputation of the great bibliopolist that he, patronizing a school that was dying out, made war on the athletes of the rising school. He assailed nearly every great man, philosopher or poet, from Kant and Goethe downwards, especially of the schools of Saxony, Swabia, and the free imperial cities. No wonder that he became afterwards what Max Flecknoe and Collie Cibber had been to Dryden and Pope. In some dozen of the Xenion of Goethe and Schiller, in 1797, he was treated as the Arch-Philistin. M.E. characterizes him as the friend and fellow laborer of Lessing. Now Lessing was incomparably the most eminent literator of the earlier part of that age, the man who was the forerunner of the philosophers, and whose criticisms supplied the place of poetry. The satirists of the Xenion affect to compassionate Lessing, in having to endure a companion so forced on him as Nicolai was, whom they speak of as a thorn in the crown of the martyr. The few who care for the literary controversies of the age of Goethe in Germany will be greatly assisted by an edition of the Xenion, with notes, published at Danzig, 1833. H.C.R. Photographic correspondence. Processes upon paper. The favorable manner in which the account I have given of the collodion process has been received, not only by your readers in general, as has been evinced by many private letters, but also by the numerous correspondence it has drawn forth, induces me, after some little delay, to request space for a description of the following processes upon paper. In giving these I wish it to be understood that I may offer but little that is original, my object being to describe, as plainly as I possibly can, these easy methods, and to make no observation but what I have found to be successful in my own hands. I have had the good fortune to obtain the friendship of some of the most successful photographers of the day, and taking three very eminent ones, I find they have each some peculiarities in his mode of manipulation, varying with each other in the strength of the solutions employed, and producing results the most agreeable to their respective tastes. Reviewing these different processes in my own mind, and trying with patience the various results, I conclude that the following quantities are calculated to produce an adequate degree of sensibility in the paper, and yet to allow it to be prepared for the action of light for many hours previous to its use, and yet with more certainty than any other I am acquainted with. I think I may always depend upon it for 24 to 36 hours after excitement, and I have seen good pictures produced upon the third day. I believe it is a rule which admits of no contradiction, that the more you dilute your solution, the longer the excited paper will keep, but in proportion to its diminished sensibility, the time of exposure must be prolonged, and therefore I am, from this waste of time and other reasons, disposed to place much less value upon the wax paper process than many do. The process I am about to describe is so simple, and I hope to make it so intelligible to your non-photographic readers, that a perfect novice, using ordinary care, must meet with success. But should I fail doing so upon all points, any information sought through the medium of N&Q shall meet with explanation from myself, if not from other of your experienced correspondents, whose indulgence I must beg should the communication be deemed too elementary, it being my earnest desire to point out to archaeologists who are desirous of acquiring this knowledge, how easily they themselves may practice this beautiful art, and possess those objects they would desire to preserve, in a far more truthful state than could be otherwise accomplished. I have not myself met that uniform success with any other paper that I have with Turner's Photographic of Chafford Mills. A sheet of this divided into two portions forms at the same time a useful and also a very easily managed size, one adapted for most cameras, forming a picture of 9 inches by 7, which is adequate for nearly every purpose. each sheet being marked in its opposite corners with a plain pencil mark on its smooth side, vide ante, page 372. The surface for all future operations is in all lights easily discerned. In my instructions for printing from collodion negatives, a form of iodized paper was given, which, although very good, is not, I think, equal to the following, which is more easily and quickly prepared, exhibits a saving of the iodide of potassium, and is upon the whole a neater mode. Take 60 grains of nitrate of silver and 60 grains of iodide of potassium. Dissolve each separately in an ounce of distilled water. Mix together and stir with a glass rod. The precipitate settling, the fluid is to be poured away. Then add distilled water to the precipitate up to 4 ounces, and add to it 650 grains of iodide of potassium, which should redissolve the precipitated iodide of silver, and form a perfectly clear solution. But if not, a little more must be carefully added, for this salt varies much. And I have found it to require 720 grains to accomplish the desired object. The fluid being put into a porcelain or glass dish, the paper should be laid down upon its surface and immediately removed, and being laid upon a piece of blotting paper with the wet surface uppermost, a glass rod then passed over it to and fro ensures the total expulsion of all particles of air, which will frequently remain when the mere dipping is resorted to. When dry, this paper should be soaked in common water for 3 hours, changing the water twice or thrice, so as to remove all the soluble salts. It should then be pinned up to dry, and when so, kept in a folio for use. I have in this manner prepared from 60 to 80 sheets in an evening with the greatest ease. It keeps good for an indefinite time, and, as all experienced photographers are aware, unless you possess good iodized paper, which should be of a primrose color, you cannot meet with success in your after operations. Iodized paper becomes sometimes of a bright brimstone color when first made. It is then very apt to brown in its use, but tones down and improves by a little keeping. To excite this paper, dissolve 30 grains of nitrate of silver in 1 ounce of distilled water, and add 1.5 drams of glacial acetic acid. Of this solution take 1 dram, and 1 dram of saturated solution of gallic acid, and add to it 2.5 ounces of distilled water. The iodized surface of the paper may then be either floated on the surface of the acetonitrate of silver or exciting fluid, and afterwards a rod passed over, as was formerly done in the iodizing, or the acetonitrate may be applied evenly with a brush. But in either instance the surface should be immediately blotted off, and the same blotting paper never used a second time for this, although it may be kept to develop on and for other purposes. It will be scarcely needful to observe that this process of exciting must be performed by the light of a candle or feeble yellow light, as must the subsequent development. The excited paper may be now placed for use between sheets of blotting paper. It seems to act equally well either when damp or when kept for many hours, and I have found it good for more than a week. And 1 dram of saturated solution of gallic acid. The time for exposure must entirely depend upon the degree of light. In 2.5 minutes a good picture may be produced, but if left exposed for 20 minutes or more, little harm will arise. The paper does not solarize, but upon the degree of image visible upon the paper depends the means of developing. When long exposed, a saturated solution of gallic acid only applied to the exposed surfaces will be sufficient, but if there is little appearance of an image, then a free undiluted solution of acetonitrate may be used, in conjunction with the gallic acid, the former never being in proportion more than 1/3. If that quantity is exceeded, either a brownish or an unpleasant reddish tint is often obtained. These negatives should be fixed by immersing them in a solution of hyposulfite of soda, which may be of the strength of 1 ounce of salt to 8 ounces of water, the sufficiency of immersion being known by the disappearance of the yellow color, and when they have been once immersed they may be taken to the daylight to ascertain this. The hyposulfite must now be perfectly removed by soaking in water, which may extend to several hours. But this may be always ascertained by the tongue, for, if tasteless, it has been accomplished. If it is deemed advisable, which I think is only required in very dark overdone pictures, to wax the negative, it is easily managed by holding a piece of white wax or candle in front of a clean iron rather hot, and passing it frequently over the surface. the superabundant wax being again removed by passing it between some clean pieces of blotting paper. Although the minuter details can never be acquired by this mode which are obtained by the collodion process, it has the advantage of extreme simplicity, and by the operator providing himself with a bag or square of yellow calico, which he can loosely peg down to the ground when no other shade is near, to contain spare prepared papers, he can at any future time obtain a sufficient number of views, which afterwards he can develop at his leisure. Solarize. Saturated. Hyposulfite. Hyposulfite. It requires no liquids to be carried about with you, nor is that nice manipulation required which attends the collodion process. The wax paper process has been extolled by many, and very successful results have been obtained. The paper has the undoubted advantage of keeping after being excited much longer than any other, but, from my own experience, just so much the weaker it is made, and so as to safely rely upon its long remaining useful, so it is proportionally slower in its action. And I have rarely seen from wax negatives positives so satisfactory in depth of tone, as from those which have been waxed after being taken on ordinary paper. It is all very well for gentlemen to advocate a sort of photographic tour, upon which you are to go on taking views day after day, and when you return home at leisure to develop your past proceedings. I never yet knew one so lukewarm in this pursuit as not to desire to know, at his earliest possible opportunity, the result of his labors. Indeed, were not this the case, I fear disappointment would more often result than at present, for I scarcely think any one can exactly decide upon the power of the light of any given day, without having made some little trial to guide him. I have myself, especially with collodion, found the action very rapid upon some apparently dull day, whilst, from an unexplained cause, a comparatively brighter day has been less active in its photographic results. As in the previous process, I would strongly advise Turner's paper to be used, and not the thin French papers generally adopted, because I find all the highlights so much better preserved in the English paper. It may be purchased ready waxed nearly as cheap as it may be done by oneself, but as many operators like to possess that which is entirely their own production, the following mode will be found a ready way of waxing. Procure a piece of thick smooth slate, a trifle larger than the paper to be used. Waste pieces of this description are always occurring at the slate works, and are of a trifling value. This should be made very hot by laying it close before a fire, then, covered with one layer of thick blotting paper, it will form a most admirable surface upon which to use the iron. Taking a piece of wax in the left hand, an iron well heated being pressed against it, it may rapidly be made to flow over the whole surface with much evenness, the surplus wax being afterwards removed by ironing between blotting paper. When good, it should be colorless, free from gloss, and having the beautiful semi-transparent appearance of the Chinese rice paper. To iodize the paper completely, immerse it in the following solution: iodide of potash, 200 grains, mannite, 0.06 drams, 0.0, cyanide of potash, 0.05 grains, 0.0, distilled water, 0.20 ounces, 0. Allow it to remain 3 hours, taking care that air particles are perfectly excluded, and once during the time turning over each sheet of paper, as many being inserted as the fluid will conveniently cover, as it is not injured by after keeping. It should be then removed from the iodide bath, pinned up, and dried, ready for use. When required to be excited, the paper should, by the light of a candle, be immersed in the following solution, where it should remain for 5 minutes. Nitrate of silver, 0.04 drams, 0.0. Glacial acetic acid, 0.04 drams, 0.0. Distilled water, 0.08 ounces, 0.0. Being removed from the acetonitrate bath, immerse it into a pan of distilled water, where let it remain about a quarter of an hour. In order to make this paper keep a week or two, it must be immersed in the second water, which in point of fact is a mere reduction of the strength of the solutions already used, but for ordinary purposes, and when the paper is to be used within 3 or 4 days, one immersion is quite sufficient, especially as it does not reduce its sensitiveness in a needless way. It may now be preserved between blotting paper, free from light, for future use. The time of exposure requisite for this paper will exceed that of the ordinary unwaxed, given in the previous directions. The picture may be developed by a complete immersion also in a saturated solution of gallic acid, but should it not have been exposed a sufficient time in the camera, a few drops of the acetonitrate solution added to the gallic acid greatly accelerates it. An excess of acetonitrate often produces an unpleasant red tint, which is to be avoided. Instead of complete immersion, the paper may be laid upon some waste blotting paper, and the surface only wetted by means of the glass rod or brush. The picture may now be fixed by the use of the hyposulfite of soda, as in the preceding process. Hyposulfite. It is not actually necessary that this should be a wax paper process, because ordinary paper treated in this way acts very beautifully, although it does not allow of so long keeping for use after excitement. Yet it has then the advantage that a negative may either be waxed or not, as shall be deemed advisable by its apparent depth of action. Hugh W. Diamond. Hugh W. Diamond. Exhibition of recent specimens of photography at the Society of Arts. This exhibition, to which all interested in the art have been invited to contribute, was inaugurated by a conversazione at the Society's rooms, on the evening of Wednesday, the 22nd of December. The public have since been admitted at a charge of 6 pence each, and it will continue open until the 8th of January. We strongly recommend all our friends to pay a visit to this most delightful collection. By our visit at the crowded conversazione, and another hasty view since, we do not feel justified to enter into a review and criticism of the specimens so fully as the subject requires, but in the meantime we can assure our archaeological readers that they will find there such interesting records of architectural detail, together with views of antiquities from Egypt and Nubia, as will perfectly convince them of the value of this art with reference to their own immediate pursuits. Those who feel less delight in mere antiquity will be gratified to see, for the first time, that there are here shown photographs which aim at more than the bare copying of any particular spot, for many of the pictures here exhibited may rank as fine works of art. We feel much delicacy and hesitation in mentioning any particular artist, where so many are entitled to praise, especially in some particular departments. We could point out pictures having all the minute truthfulness of nature, combined with the beautiful effects of some of the greatest painters. We must, however, direct especial attention to the landscapes of Mr. Turner, the views in the Pyrenees by Mr. Stewart, and one splendid one of the same locality by Legray. Mr. Buckle's views in paper also exhibit a sharpness and detail almost equal to collodion, as do the various productions of Mr. Fenton in wax paper. The effects obtained also by Mr. Owen of Bristol appear to be very satisfactory. Why they are, with so much excellence, called experimental, we cannot tell. In collodion Mr. Berger has exhibited some effective portraits, and we think the success of Mr. de la Motte has been so great, that in some of his productions little remains to be desired. We cannot conclude this brief notice without directing attention to the minuteness and pleasing effect of the views in Rome by M. Eugene Constant, which are also from collodion, as also the specimens from albumen negatives of M. Ferrier, and lastly, to the pleasant fact that lady amateurs are now practicing this art, very nice specimens being here exhibited by the ladies Neville, whose example we shall hope to see followed. Replies to minor queries. Quotation in Locke, Volume 6, page 386. The words, "Assi non vis intelligi non debs legi," were, I believe, the exclamation of St. Jerome, as he threw his copy of Persius into the fire in a fit of testiness at being unable to construe some tough lines of that tough author. I set down this reply from memory, and am unable to give the authority for it. W. Fraser. W. Fraser. Picnic, Volume 6, pages 152. 518. The query of A. F. S. Page 152, as to the etymology of picnic still remains unanswered. The note of W. W. Page 518. Merely refers to the time, 1802, when picnic suppers first became fashionable in England. Under a French form, the word appears in a speech of Robespierre's, quoted in the British and Foreign Review for July, 1844, page 620. Say ici tuil doit M accuser, et non dans les piques-niques, dans les sociétés particulières. An earlier instance occurs in one of Lord Chesterfield's letters, number 167, dated October 1748. J.D. Discovery at Nuneham Regis, Volume 6, pages 386. 488, 558. Nuneham Regis was granted to John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, in the 7th year of King Edward VI, but as it was forfeited on his attainder, in the 1st year of Queen Mary, and immediately granted by her to Sir Rowland Hill, Knight, and citizen of London, from whom Sir Thomas Lee, Knight, and Alderman of London, almost immediately acquired it. And as he exercised the right of presentation to the vicarage in the 1st year of the reign of Queen Elizabeth, there is no probability of the body of John, Duke of Northumberland, being removed from the Tower of London to Nuneham. The letters T. B. on the clothes on the body at Nuneham are distinctly worked in Roman capitals, like those on a common sampler. I have seen them. JSS. Door Head Inscriptions, Volume 6, page 543. Sit mihi nec glis servis nec hosps herudo. From servant lazy as dormouse. Or leeching guest, God keep my house. Mr. Woodward tells us that he quotes this inscription from memory. It is so very pertinent that it seems a pity even to hint a correction, but as I read it, it seemed partly familiar to me, and I find something so like the latter part of it in 2 ancient authors, that I am tempted to inquire whether he may not have omitted one letter, which alters the sense as given above, and yet gives a sense as good. Mr. Woodward. Among the symbols of Pythagoras, I read the following. Omicron nu omega o omicron phi ot omicron upsilon chi epsilon lambda iota delta omega nu alpha mu eta epsilon chi epsilon iota nu. Omicron nu omega o omicron phi ot omicron upsilon chi epsilon lambda iota delta omega nu alpha mu eta epsilon chi epsilon iota nu. Domesticus hiru en dines eni habito. To the same effect, but strange to say, without any reference to Pythagoras' dictum, we find it in the Proverbia of Polydore Virgil, AD 1498. AD. Hiru en ducicipienda non est. And the exposition is the same in both. Herundo gorilla semper, i.e. gorilli et to miseri homines recipiendi non sunt. I find no original for the former part of the inscription. Probably Mr. Woodward will agree with me that it is difficult to decide whether a greedy or a gossiping guest would be the worst household infliction, but as a careful householder might well deprecate either, as matter of curiosity perhaps he would refer to the original inscription again, and decide whether he has or has not omitted an N. Mr. Woodward. A. B. R. Belmont. Stratford Parsonage, Wilts. Parva sed apta domino. 1675. Monacude House, Somerset. Through this wide opening gate. None come too soon, none go too late. And yours. Sudbury House, Derbyshire. Omni bonum Dei donum. At Verona. Patet Janua, Cor Magus. The next I have seen somewhere. Deter Digniori. H. T. Ellicombe. H. T. Ellicombe. Clyst George. Cross and Pile, Volume 6, pages 386. 513. The pile is invariably on the obverse or head side of a coin, and pile or poll both mean the head, from whence the poll tax and poll groat. A tax paid by the head, or a personal tax, of which we have an historical example of its collector in the case of Wat Tyler. Rooting, in Annals of the Coinage, Volume 2, page 119, 8 vo, edit. 1819, states that edition I, AD 1304, in the delivering out the stamps for the coinage, orders that 3 piles and 6 crosses shall be given. It is well known to all numismatists that all, or most early coins, both Saxon and English, had a head on the obverse and a cross on the reverse, the latter being placed on the coins as symbolical of Christianity. AD. Pile also means the hair, or any filament, as the pile of velvet, the nap of woolen cloth. And C. And Jameson, in his Scotch dictionary, says, pile. The soft hair which first appears on the chins of young men. Pile. Coles, Ash, Webster, and others give the same meaning. The superstitious effect of the cross as a charm or amulet is well known, from whence the saying, "I have never a cross in my purse to keep the devil away." Again, priests were coin-proof against the devil, they never being without money, of course, always had a cross in their pocket. Gilpin's Beehive of the Romish Church, 1636, page 251. And Nash, in the supplication of Pierce penniless to the devil, makes Pierce to say, "Whereas your impious excellence hath had the poor tenement of my purse any time this half year for your dancing skull, and he, notwithstanding, hath received no penny nor cross for farm." N.C. And the poet Skelton says, "And in his poach, the devil might dance therein for any crouch." Page 71. Trusting the above will be satisfactory to D. W. S. I beg to conclude, thinking you will say I have already made much ado about nothing. Goddard Johnson. Goddard Johnson. Rhymes Upon Places, Volume 6. Page 281. Perhaps you will think the following rhymes upon places worth insertion. I stood upon Eyemouth Fort. And guess you what I saw? Fermacide and Fermentongue. Newhouses and Cocklall. The fairy folk o' Fosterland. The witches o' Edincran. The Blyrigs o' Reston. But Dunstings a dot. Near the seaside village of Eyemouth, in Berwickshire, is a promontory marked with a succession of grassy mounds, the remains of a fort built there in the regency of Mary of Lorraine. A number of places are represented as visible from the fort, but here fact is not strictly adhered to. Fosterland once existed in the parish of Bunkle as a small village, but even its vestiges are not now visible on the brown moor where it once stood. Edincran, properly Ochincran, is an estate in the vicinity of Fosterland, as is Reston also. There is a variation as follows. The fairy folk o' Fosterland. The witches o' Edincran. And the Rykale o' Reston. Guard of the dogs die. The rykale alluded to must have been a broth chiefly made from rye, which grain, it is well known, is sometimes so much tainted as to be poisonous. C. Benson. C. Benson. Birmingham. Ronomicron Volume 6, page 509. Probably your correspondent is aware of the explanation given by Dr. Wordsworth in his book on the Apocalypse, but does not think it satisfactory. Still, as he does not allude to it, I venture to transcribe it. Ronomicron. The Apocalypse abounds in contrasts. For example, the Lamb, who is always called Mu, never Ronomicron, in St. John's Gospel, is called Ronomicron, never Mu, in St. John's Apocalypse, in which Ronomicron occurs 29 times. And why does Alpha Mu Omicron here become Tau Ronomicron? To contrast him more strongly with Tau Theta Omicron, that is, to mark the opposition between the Lamb and the Beast. Lamb. Mu. Ronomicron. Mu. Ronomicron. Alpha Mu Omicron. Tau Ronomicron. Tau Theta Omicron. Lamb. To this a note is appended. This contrast is even more striking in the original, where it is aided by an exact correspondence of syllables and accents. On one side are Pyronuida Cap Alpha Tau Theta Omicron. Pyronuida Cap Alpha Tau Theta Omicron. On the other, Nunifida Cap Alpha Tau Ronomicron. Nunifida Cap Alpha Tau Ronomicron. See Rev 21. 2, 9, 22. 17. Is the Church of Rome Babylon? Page 58, London, 1851. AAD. Ronu Omicron Nu and Unu both denote a lamb. In John I, 29. 36. The latter is applied to Jesus by John the Baptist. In Acts 8. 32, and 1 Pet. I, 19. The term is manifestly derived from Isa. 53, 7, the Septuagint translation. But in the Revelation, the word selected by the Apostle is simply to be viewed as characteristic of his style. Taken in connection with John I, 29. 36. The difference presents one of those points which so strikingly attest the authenticity of the scripture. If the writer had drawn upon his imagination, in all likelihood he would have used the word Ronuomicranu in the Gospel. But he employed another, because the Baptist actually made use of a different one, i.e., one different from that which he was in the habit of employing. Ronuomicranu. Mu nu. Ronuomicranu. B. H. Cooper. B. H. Cooper. Who was the greatest general? Volume 6, page 509. In reply to the following query: who was the greatest general, and why and wherefore did the Duke of Wellington give the palm to Hannibal? I think the following note appended to the eloquent sermon of Dr. Crowley, preached on the death of the Duke, September 19th, not only shows the humility of the Duke in giving preference to Hannibal over himself, but it contains so just a comparison between the two generals, that it deserves recording in the valuable and useful pages of the N&Q, as well as being a perfect and true answer to C.T. It has been usual, the note says, to compare Wellington with Hannibal. But those who make the comparison seem to forget the facts. Hannibal, descending from the Alps with a disciplined force of 26,000 men, met the brave Roman militia, commanded by brave blockheads, and beat them accordingly. But as soon as he was met by a man of common sense, Fabius, he could do nothing with him. When he met a maneuvering officer, the consul Nero, he was outmaneuvered, and lost his brother Astribal's army, which was equivalent to his losing Italy. And when he met an active officer, Scipio, he was beaten on his own ground. Finally, forced to take refuge with a foreign power, he was there a prisoner, and there he died. His administrative qualities seem to have been of the humblest, or of the most indolent, order. For 14 years he was in possession of, or in influence with, all the powers of southern Italy, then the richest portion of the peninsula. Yet this possession was wrested from him without an effort, and where he might have been a monarch, he was only a pensioner. His Punic faith, his flight, his refuge, and his death in captivity, might find a more complete resemblance in the history of Napoleon. The following, concluding sentence of Dr. Crowley's note conveys a truer and far more just comparison with another great general. The life of the first Caesar forms a much fairer comparison with that of Wellington. Both nobly born, both forcing their way up through the gradations of service, outstripping all their age, forming their characters by warfare in foreign countries, always commanding small armies, yet always invincible, Caesar won the world at Pharsalia with only 25,000 men, both alike courageous and clement, unfailing in resources, and indefatigable in their objects, receiving the highest rewards, and arising to the highest rank of their times, never beaten, both of first-rate ability in council. The difference being in their objects, one to serve himself, the other to serve his country, one impelled by ambition, the other by duty, one destroying the constitution of his country, the other sustaining it. Wellington, too, has given the soldier and statesman his commentaries, one of the noblest transcripts of a great administrative mind. J.M.G. Worcester. Beech Trees Struck by Lightning, Volume 6, page 129. On Thinnegrove Common, near Nettlebed, Oxon, a beech tree, one of 3 or 4 growing round a pit, was shattered by lightning about 13 or 14 years ago. A gentleman who has lived 60 years in the neighborhood of the beech woods near Henley tells me that he remembers 3 or 4 similar cases. Single beech trees, which are very ornamental, generally grow very low and wide-spreading, which may be the reason why they often escape. On the other hand, in the woods where they run up close and very high, they present so many points of attraction to the electric fluid, that probably for that cause it is not often the case that one tree in particular is struck. Corylus. Portsmouth. Passage in Tennyson, Volume 6, page 272. It appears to me that Tennyson has fallen into the error of a Latin construction. I call it an error, because in that language the very terminations of the cases and numbers make that plain which we have no means of evidencing in English. I should translate it. Nemini strepitus volantis, the call of the curlew drearily, gleams about the moorland, as he flies o'er Locksley Hall. The summer note of the curlew is a shrill clear whistle, but in winter they sometimes indulge in a wild melancholy scream. Coriolis. Coriolis. Portsmouth. Inscriptions in Churches, Volume 6, page 510. I differ from your reply to Norwood's query, in which you refer to the colloquy between Queen Elizabeth and Dean Noel as the origin of these inscriptions. No doubt they were derived from the custom of our anti-Reformation ancestors, of painting figures and legends of saints upon the walls of churches, but the following instance will suffice to prove that they originated in the reign of Edward VI, and not in Queen Elizabeth's. Norwood's. In the interesting paper by the Rev. Venables in the Transactions of the Cambridge Camden Society on the Church of St. Mary the Great, Cambridge, he gives, under the year 1550, the following extracts from the churchwarden's accounts. For making of the wall where St. George stood in the church. V.J. It. Paid for withinge ychrch. XX Theage. It. Paid for writing of ychrch walls with scriptures. Theage I.J. Theage. Shortly after the accession of Queen Mary in 1553, the following entry occurs. Paid to Barnes for mending over the road and over the altar in the chapel, and for washing of the scriptures. 4.4. They do not appear to have been restored after this, for in the year 1840 some of the plaister between two of the windows of the south aisle peeling off, discovered traces of writing beneath, and I and another member of the Cambridge Camden Society spent some time in laying it bare, and after much difficulty made out that it was the Lord's Prayer in English, headed The Lord's Prayer, called the Pater Noster, and written in the church text of the period, the whole enclosed in a sort of arabesque border. It was not merely whited over, but had evidently been partially effaced, or partly washed out, before being concealed under its dreary shroud of whitewash. On examination there were traces of more of this writing between the other windows, but we had not time to make any further investigation, for the church was then being cleaned, and in a few days all that we had laid bare was again concealed under a veil of whitewash. Thus, I think, we may assign to the reign of Edward VI, not merely the obliteration of the numerous frescoes of St. Christopher, the Great Dome, and c. which are now so constantly coming to light, but also the origin of writing of ychrch walls with scriptures. In their stead, some 10 or 12 years earlier than the remarkable colloquy between Queen Elizabeth and the worthy Dean of St. Paul's. Norris Deck. Norris Deck. Cambridge. Detentiana, Volume 6, page 376. Lowndes gives a list of Dutton's works, which does not include Correspondence Intercepti, of which he was the author, and I have seen a presentation copy of it proving this. W. C. Trevelyan. W. C. Trevelyan. Early Phonography, Volume 6, page 424. Have the modern phonographists ever owned their debt of gratitude to their predecessors in the phonetic art? The subjoined advertisement may perhaps be considered an answer to this query. Hart's Orthography, 1569, or An Orthography Containing the Due Order and Reason, How to Write or Paint Th'Image of Man's Voice, Most Like to the Life or Nature. Composed by J. H. John Hart, Chester Herald, reprinted from a copy in the British Museum. Cloth 2s. An unanswerable defense of phonetic spelling, and one of the earliest schemes of phonetic orthography. A considerable portion of the book being printed in the author's phonetic alphabet, given in the present edition in phonetic longhand, we have thus exhibited the pronunciation of the age of Shakespeare. W. C. Trevelyan. W. C. Trevelyan. Kentish Local Names, Dre, Volume 6, page 410. In the low embanked land in the west of Somersetshire, between Bristol and Taunton, the word drove is used in the same acceptation, and driftway, I think, is also a term for ancient British roads in some parts of the kingdom. W. C. Trevelyan. W. C. Trevelyan. Monument at Modstena, Volume 6, page 388. This monument was first published in Archaeologia Aliana. I believe it is an incised slab, but I have written to a friend in the north to inquire whether I am correct. W. C. Trevelyan. W. C. Trevelyan. Bookplates, Volume 3, page 495. Mr. Parsons, it appears, limits his inquiries to English bookplates, about which I cannot offer any information. It is certain, however, that bookplates were used on the continent at a very early period. I remember to have seen one, from a woodblock, which was cut by Albert Dürer for his friend Pirkheimer. As it is 16 years since I saw it at the Imperial Library at Vienna, I cannot be expected to give a precise description, but, as far as I recollect, the wording of it was as follows: Billibaldi Pirkheimeri et amicarum. Mr. Parsons. A copy which I possess of Vesalius's great anatomical work, Basel, 1555, has the bookplate of a former Duke of Mecklenburg pasted inside the cover. It is a woodcut, 10 inches by 6.5, representing the ducal arms, surrounded by an ornamented border. Beneath are the date and inscription: 15E75H, G, V, G, Vlurich H, Z, Mecklenburg. I do not know what the first 6 letters stand for, nor is it worth inquiring. The latter part of the inscription, Ulrich Herzog zu Mecklenburg, identifies the former possessor of the volume. J.D. World Without End, Volume 6, page 434. Besides the places named by F.A., this phrase occurs in the authorized version of the Bible, in is. XLV, 17, EP3. 21. There is no doubt it is idiomatic, and is even now occasionally used in conversation. Our translators render at least 3 Hebrew words, world, and as many Greek ones. One of the latter, and 2 of the former, properly refer to time, like the Latin evum seculum, and this also appears to have been the original meaning of world, as it is one which it certainly has frequently in the Scriptures. World without end is the idiomatic rendering, equivalent to in secula seculorum, which is a literal following of an idiom common in both the Hebrew and Greek Scriptures, and to be found in the Chaldee of the Book of Daniel. World without end does not occur, so far as I am aware, in the modern European languages, which generally either follow the Latin in secula seculorum, or the German and say eternally to eternity. B. H. Cooper. B. H. Cooper. Gloucester Ballads, Volume 4, page 311. Since I inserted these ballads, I have been informed that the one entitled A Gloucester Ditty was from the pen of Charles Dibdin, who, paying a visit to the fair city, was pressed by some friends to leave them a memento of such. Of my own knowledge, I cannot vouch for the truth of this story. My informant's veracity is, however, unquestionable. I have recently obtained another copy. Like the former, it is without a date, but bears the well-known imprint. Rakes, Southgate Street. The Old Harry is intended for one Harry Hudman, King of the Island, a low district in Gloucester, a mock officer chosen by the lower orders. Harry kept the throne many years, but was at length outvoted. But resolving to retain by stratagem what he could not by free choice, invited his competitor to a glass, and while the latter was taking his draught, Harry jumped into his seat, was chaired through the island, and was thus king another year. There was a ballad relating to this worthy, commencing: There was a man of renown in Gloucester's fam town. Another verse informs us that old coffins ne'er new, and old pulpits too, can be bought at his shop in the island. The Tailor's Tale, alluded to as a ballad, written by a person of that name, on the manners and customs of the island. I have not been able to obtain copies of either of these just noticed ballads, and should any correspondent of N and Q possess such, they would oblige me by their insertion. H. G. D. Satirical Prints, Pope, Volume 6, page 434. I have never seen this print that your correspondent refers to. It will no doubt be found, however, to be a plate illustrating as seen in the following tract. A letter from Mr. Cibber to Mr. Pope, N.C., London, printed and sold by West Lewis in Russell Street, Covent Garden, 1742. See pages 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, where is given rather a warm description of the whole scene. Should this tract not be had by Griffin, he may turn to Disraeli's Quarrels of Authors article. Pope and Cibber. Note page 193, Colonel 2, edit. 8 Vio. Moxon 1840, where Disraeli adds. Griffin. This story, by our comic writer, was accompanied by a print that was seen by more persons, probably, than read the Dunciad. S. Sumpson. S. Sumpson. Raising the Wind, Volume 6, page 486. We say, the wind rises, and this is common in Virgil, see Aeneid. 3, 130. 481, v. 777, George Xi, 356, 2. 333, and 3. 134. The transition from rising to raising is easy, and as there is no sailing without a breeze, so there is no getting along without money. In both cases, the wind is essential to progress. As to the mode of obtaining the needful, I know not much, but probably whistling will be found as effectual in one case as in the other. B. H. Cooper. B. H. Cooper. Milton in Prose, Volume 6, page 340. I know of one performance in the French language, which answers the description of Milton in prose. It is a rhapsody entitled Le Paradis Terrestre, Poème de Milton, by Madame du Bossiage, London, 1748. The French themselves had so poor an opinion of it, that one of their wits, the Abbé Yart, has ridiculed it in the following epigram. Sur C.T. écrit, charmanti du Bossiage. Vertu savoir quel est mon sentiment. J'ai compte pour produise, and li sant ton ouvrage. Le paradis, mon temps, ta peine, et mon argent. Henry H. Breen. Henry H. Breen. St. Lucia. The Arundelian Marbles, Volume 4, page 361. Mr. W. Sidney Gibson, in his account of this celebrated collection, quotes portions of an interesting letter from James Theobald to Lord Willoughby de Parham, but he does not say from whence he obtained it. I have now before me 2 copies, one in Historical Anecdotes of the Howard Family, a new edition, 1817, page 101, the other in a work entitled Oxoniana, published by Richard Phillips, for volumes 12mo, no date, volume 3, page 42. Now both these copies differ from Mr. Gibson's, and all 3 are at variance respecting some of those minor details which are of so much importance in inquiries of this description. Where is a genuine copy of Mr. Theobald's letter to be found? Mr. W. Sidney Gibson. Mr. Gibson's? Edward F. Rimbault. Edward F. Rimbault. Pambotanologia, Volume 6, page 462. In Ivry will find a full account of this work in Pulteney's Historical and Biographical Sketches of the Progress of Botany in England, Volume 1, page 181. In Ivry. George Munford. George Munford. East Winch. Can a man baptize himself? Volume 6, pages 36. 110. This question has not yet received any correct answer. The following quotation from the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas will resolve it as far as your Querist W. is concerned. Simuliter autem forma mutareater, si diseritor ego baptizo me, et ideo nullus potus baptizar sipsum propt quod et Christus adjo and voluit baptizari. Summa 3 pars, quaestio 66. Art. V. Arg. 4. Christus. The Rev. A. Gaddy, while right in the negative answer which he gives to the question of W, is quite wrong in the reasons on which he founds it. Christian fellowship is not of necessity a requisite for administering the sacrament of holy baptism. I quote again from the Summa of St. Thomas. Rev. A. Gaddy. Ad primum ergo dicendum, quod baptismum schismaticis recipere non licet, nisi in articulo necessitatis, qui Aemilius est hac vita cum signo Christi exire, a quo cumptitur, idiom si sit Judaeus vel paganus, quam sign hoc signo, quod per baptismum conferter. Summa 2 pars, quaestio 39. Art. 4. Arg. 1. Christi. As our own Church apparently only recognizes sacerdotal baptism in her formularies, in answering such a question as that of W, we must have recourse to the schoolmen and casuists of earlier times. W. Fraser. W. Fraser. Miscellaneous. Books in odd volumes. Wanted to purchase. Sharp's Prose Writers. Volume 4. 21 volumes 1819. Piccadilly. Sharp's Prose Writers. Inchbald's British Theatre. Volume 24. 25 volumes Longman. Inchbald's British Theatre. Merrick's Ancient Armor by Skelton. Part 16. Merrick's Ancient Armor. Skelton. Don. Beta Iod Alpha Theta Nu Alpha Tau Omicron. 4-2. First edition, 1644. Don. Beta Iod Alpha Theta Nu Alpha Tau Omicron. Second edition, 1648. Pseudomartyr. 4-2. Pseudomartyr. Paradoxes, Problems, and Essays, and c. 12 mo. 1653. Paradoxes, Problems, and Essays. Essays in Divinity. 12 mo. 1651. Essays in Divinity. Sermons on Isaiah L. 1. Sermons on Isaiah. Pope's Works by Wharton. Volume 9. 1797, in boards. Pope's Works. Wharton. Percy Society Publications. Number 94. 3 copies. Percy Society Publications. Memoirs of the Duchess of Abrantes. Translation. 8 volumes 8 vo. Bentley. Memoirs of the Duchess of Abrantes. Smith's Collectanea Antiqua. 2 volumes 8 vo, or Volume 1. Smith's Collectanea Antiqua. Brewster's Memoir of Rev. Hugh Moyses, M.A., Master of Newcastle Grammar School. Brewster's Memoir of Rev. Hugh Moyses. Religio Militis, or Christianity for the Camp. Longmans, 1826. Religio Militis. Milton's Works. The First Edition. Milton's Works. Dr. Cotton Mather's Memorable Providences on Witchcraft and Possessions. Preface by Baxter. Date about 1691. Dr. Cotton Mather's Memorable Providences on Witchcraft and Possessions. Gibbon's Roman Empire. Volumes I and II. Of the 12-volume 8 vo. edition. Gibbon's Roman Empire. Muller's Notes on the Eumenides of Aeschylus. Muller's Notes on the Eumenides of Aeschylus. Campbell's Gaelic Poems. Campbell's Gaelic Poems. Columbus Conundrums. Columbus Conundrums. Poems of Alastair Mac Maister Alastair. MacDonald. Poems of Alastair Mac Maister Alastair. MacDonald. Turner's Collection of Gaelic Poetry. Turner's Collection of Gaelic Poetry. Mac Aulay's History of St. Kilda. Mac Aulay's History of St. Kilda. Grant's Gaelic Poems. Grant's Gaelic Poems. Gillies' Collection of Gaelic Poems. Gillies' Collection of Gaelic Poems. Asterisk correspondents sending lists of books wanted are requested to send their names. Asterisk letters, stating particulars and lowest price, carriage free, to be sent to Mr. Bell, publisher of Notes and Queries, 186. Fleet Street. Mr. Bell. Notices to correspondents. We have this week been compelled to omit our usual notes on books, and c. Notes on books. W. Malta is thanked for his suggestion. We fear, however, that the difficulties in the way of carrying it out, which are far more than he suspects, will still prevent our doing so, as we have often desired. Peter the Saxonian is referred to our first volume, page 102, where he will find that both Blair and Campbell were anticipated by Norris of Bemerton, who sang of Peter the Saxonian. Angels' visits, short and bright. R.G.L. The meaning and derivation of ditto are obvious. It means the same, from the Italian ditto, the said. Ditto. Touchstone. Music is sometimes engraved, sometimes printed from movable types. Touchstone. J. C., who inquires whether Shelley first imagined the name of Mab, has, we fear, never read Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, or Mercutio's account of the fairy's midwife. We almost envy him. F. R. S. Bark Island. His query shall appear, and we think we may promise him a full and satisfactory reply. H. C. K. and other correspondents respecting the inscription at Dewsbury are thanked. A. B. The line. and coming events cast their shadows before, is from Campbell's Lochiel's warning. H. B. C., the correspondent to whom H. B. C. refers us, furnished his name and address. But perhaps our correspondent's reply had better appear. W. H. T. Salisbury. Ophia Makes was written by the Rev. Philip Skelton. See further our number 157, page 415. The other queries shall have early attention. Dewey and Mant's Commentary. With reference to our note in number 157, a correspondent informs us that an edition is now publishing in parts at 6d. each by Strange. Dewey and Mant's Commentary. Photography. Owing to the length of Dr. Diamond's directions for the paper process and our present no, we are compelled to postpone many interesting communications. Dr. Diamond's former articles are contained in our numbers 151, 152, 153, and 155. All our numbers, however, subsequent to 148, contain communications on this interesting subject. Photography. Dr. Diamond. Dr. Diamond. The index and title page to our 6th volume will be ready very shortly. The index and title page. Back numbers of notes and queries. Full price will be given for clean copies of numbers 27, 28, 29, 30, 59, 60, and 61. Back numbers of notes and queries. Notes and Queries is published at noon on Friday, so that the country booksellers may receive copies in that night's parcel and deliver them to their subscribers on the Saturday. Notes and Queries. Mr. Henri Van Loan assists gentlemen in obtaining a critical knowledge of the French, German, and Dutch languages. From his acquaintance with the ancient as well as the modern literature of these 3 languages, and also with the best English authors, he can render his lessons valuable to gentlemen pursuing antiquarian or literary researches. He also undertakes the translation of manuscripts. Communications to be addressed, prepaid, Andrews Library, 167. New Bond Street. English Counties. A catalogue of interesting and curious books relating to English counties is published in the Shakespeare Repository, and will be forwarded to any part of the kingdom, free, on receipt of 8 postage stamps, by James H. Fennell, No. 1. Warwick Court, Holborn, London. Gratis, upon sending a postage stamp for franking each, No. 1. Duncan's History of Kent, after the plan of Haste's History of the County. Duncan's plan for preserving the monumental inscriptions in English churches. Duncan's, of Dartford, prospectus, 8 pages, of his History of Kent. Apply to William Chandler, Arkle Mine Office, Dartford. Heel and Sons eiderdown quilts are made in 3 varieties, the bordered quilt, the plain quilt, and the duvet. The bordered quilt is in the usual form of bed quilts, and is a most elegant and luxurious article. The plain quilt is smaller, and is useful as an extra covering on the bed, as a wrapper in the carriage, or on the couch. The duvet is a loose case filled with eiderdown as in general use on the continent. Lists of prices and sizes sent free by post, on application to Heel and Sons Bedding Factory, 196. Tottenham Court Road. Ralph's Sermon Paper. This approved paper is particularly deserving the notice of the clergy, as, from its particular form, each page measuring 5 3/4 by 9 inches, it will contain more matter than the size in ordinary use, and from the width being narrower, is much more easy to read, adapted for expeditious writing with either the quill or metallic pen, price 5s. per ream. Sample on application. Envelope paper. To identify the contents with the address and postmark, important in all business communications, it admits of 3 clear pages, each measuring 5½ by 8 inches. For correspondence, it saves time and is more economical. Price 9s. 60 per ream. F. W. Ralph, Manufacturing Stationer, 36. Throgmorton Street, Bank. Western Life Assurance and Annuity Society. 3. Parliament Street, London. Founded AD 1842. Directors: H. Edgeworth Bicknell, Esq. William Cabell, Esq. T. Summers Cox, June, Esq. MPG. Henry Drew, ESQ William Evans, ESQ William Freeman, ESQ F. Fuller, ESQ J. Henry Goodhart, ESQ T. Gristle, ESQ James Hunt, ESQ J. Arscott Lethbridge, ESQ E. Lucas, ESQ James Liz Seeger, ESQ J. Basley White, ESQ Joseph Carter Wood, ESQ Trustees W. Waitley ESQ QC L. C. Humphrey ESQ QC, George Drew ESQ. Consulting Counsel Sir W. M. P. Wood MP. Physician William Rich. Basham MD. Bankers Messrs. Cox, Biddulph and Company, Charing Cross. Valuable privilege. Policies effected in this office do not become void through temporary difficulty in paying a premium, as permission is given upon application to suspend the payment at interest, according to the conditions detailed on the prospectus. Specimens of rates of premium for assuring 100L, with a share in 3/4 of the profits. Age S. D. Age S. D. 17. 1. 14. 4. 32. 2. 10. 8. 22. 1. 18. 8. 37. 2. 18. 6. 27. 2. 4. 5. 42. 3. 8. 2. Arthur Scratchley, M.A. FRAS, Actuary. Now ready, price 10s. 60. Second edition, with material additions, Industrial Investment and Emigration, being a treatise on benefit building societies, and on the general principles of land investment, exemplified in the cases of freehold land societies, building companies, and c. with a mathematical appendix on compound interest and life assurance. By Arthur Scratchley, M.A., Actuary to the Western Life Assurance Society, 3. Parliament Street, London. Ross's photographic portrait and landscape lenses. These lenses give correct definition at the center and margin of the picture, and have their visual and chemical acting foci coincident. Great Exhibition Jurors Reports, page 274. Mr. Ross prepares lenses for portraiture having the greatest intensity yet produced, by procuring the coincidence of the chemical actinic and visual rays. The spherical aberration is also very carefully corrected, both in the central and oblique pencils. Mr. Ross has exhibited the best camera in the exhibition. It is furnished with a double achromatic object lens, about 3 inches aperture. There is no stop, the field is flat, and the image very perfect up to the edge. A. R. invites those interested in the art to inspect the large photographs of Vienna, produced by his lenses and apparatus. Catalogue sent upon application. A. Ross 2. Featherstone Buildings, High Holborn. Photographic portraits and views by the collodion and wax paper process. Apparatus, materials, and pure chemical preparation for the above processes. Superior iodized collodion, known by the name of collodioiodide or xyloiodide of silver, 9d per ounce. Pyrogallic acid 4s per dram. Acetic acid, suited for collodion pictures, 8d per ounce. Crystallizable and perfectly pure, on which the success of the calotype is so much depends, 1s per ounce. Canson Frere's negative paper, 3s. Positive dew, 4s. 6d. Lacroix, 3s. Turner, 3s. Whatman's negative and positive, 3s. per quire. Iodized wax paper, 10s. 6d. per quire. Sensitive paper ready for the camera, and warranted to keep from 14 to 20 days, with directions for use, 11 by 9 9s. per dozen. Iodized, only 6s. per dozen. George Knight and Sons, sole agents for Voigtlander and Sons celebrated lenses, Foster Lane, London. Photographic chemicals of absolute purity, especially prepared for this art, may be procured from R. W. Thomas, operative chemist, 10. Pall Mall, whose well-known preparation of xyloiodide of silver is pronounced by the most eminent scientific men of the day to excel every other photographic compound in sensitiveness, and in the marvelous vigor uniformly preserved in the middle tints of pictures produced by it. Mr. R. W. Thomas cautions photographers against unprincipled persons who, from the fact of xyloidin and collodion being synonymous terms, would lead them to imagine that the inferior compound sold by them at half the price is identical with his preparation. In some cases, even the name of Mr. T.S. xyloiodide of silver has been assumed. In order to prevent such dishonorable practice, each bottle sent from his establishment is stamped with a red label bearing his signature, to counterfeit which is felony. Prepared solely by R. W. Thomas, chemist, and C. 10. Pall Mall. Photographic pictures. A selection of the above beautiful productions may be seen at Bland and Long's, 153. Fleet Street, where may also be procured apparatus of every description, and pure chemicals for the practice of photography in all its branches. Calotype, daguerreotype, and glass pictures for the stereoscope. Bland and Long, opticians, philosophical and photographical instrument makers, and operative chemists, 153. Fleet Street. Burke's, Right Hon. Edmund, Works and Correspondence. The new edition, containing the whole of the contents of the former edition published in 20 volumes, 8 vo, at the price of 9l. 5s, is now completed, handsomely printed in 8 volumes 8 vo, with portrait and facsimile, price 4l. 4s. Rivington's, St. Paul's Churchyard, and Waterloo Place. * The reflections on the French Revolution may be had separately, price 4s. 60, in cloth boards. The Gentleman's Magazine for January 1853, which is the first number of a new volume, contains the following articles. 1. King Charles I, in the Isle of Wight. 2. Original letters of Benjamin Franklin. 3. Farinelli and Pompadour. 4. Henry Newcome, the Manchester Puritan. 5. A Journey to Paris in 1736. 6. The Cloister Life of Charles V. 7. The Hill Entrenchments on the Borders of Wales, by T. Wright, F.S.A., with engravings. 8. Report of the Cambridge University Commission. 9. Correspondence of Sylvanus Urban. 1. Pictures of the Immaculate Conception. 2. The Relic of St. Mariax. 3. Harley Church, Salop. 4. Etymology of the word many. With notes of the month, reviews of new publications, historical chronicle, and obituary, including memoirs of the Earl of Shrewsbury, Countess of Lovelace, Sir J. Guest, Miss Berry, Professor Empson, Mr. Sergeant Halcombe, N.C. Obituary. A specimen number sent on the receipt of 2s. 60, in postage stamps. Nichols and Son, 25. Parliament Street. Miller's London Librarian and Book Buyer's Gazette for January, 1853, in addition to 1,000 valuable books in all departments of literature offered at low prices, will contain fly leaves, or scraps and sketches, literary, bibliographical, and miscellaneous. Contents of No. I. Address, Milton's country residence, Pious Chloe, neglected biography, J.S. Sibbald, memorials of Old London, bibliographical notices, specimens of ancient English poetry, scraps and sketches, forming, with the list of books, 24 pages imp. 8 vo, price 2d, or stamped for the country 3d. Just ready. Miller's London Librarian from January to December, 1852, inclusive, being Volume 1, handsomely half-bound, price 5s, allowed to purchasers. John Miller, 43. Chandos Street, Trafalgar Square. Kerr and Strang, Perfumers and Wigmakers, 124. Leadenhall Street, London, respectfully inform the nobility and public that they have invented and brought to the greatest perfection the following leading articles, besides numerous others: their ventilating natural curl, ladies' and gentlemen's perukes, either crops or full dress, with partings and crowns so natural as to defy detection, and with or without their improved metallic springs, ventilating fronts, bandeaus, borders, nats, bands à la reine, and c. Also their instantaneous liquid hair dye, the only dye that really answers for all colors, and never fades nor acquires that unnatural red or purple tint common to all other dyes. It is permanent, free of any smell, and perfectly harmless. Any lady or gentleman, skeptical of its effects in dyeing any shade of color, can have it applied, free of any charge, at Kerr and Strang's, 124 Leadenhall Street. Sold in cases at 7s, 60, 15s, and 20s, samples 3s, 60, sent to all parts on receipt of post office order or stamps. Murray's Railway Reading. Containing works of sound information and innocent amusement, printed in large readable type, varying in size and price, and suited for all classes of readers. This day is published. Literary Essays and Characters. By Henry Hallam. 2s. The former volumes are Life and Character of Wellington. By Lord Ellesmere. 6d. Music and Dress. 2 essays. 1s. The Emigrant. By Sir F. B. Head. 2s. 60. Art of Dining, or Gastronomy and Gastronomers. 1s. 60. Joan of Arc, an Historical Essay. By Lord Mahone. 1s. Literary Essays from The Times. 4s. Nimrod on the Turf. 1s. 60. Layard's Popular Account of Nineveh. 5s. Life of Theodore Hook. 1s. James' Fables of Aesop. 100 Woodcuts. 2s. 60. Lord Mahone's History of the 45. 3s. Bees and Flowers. 2 essays. 1s. each. Gifford's Deeds of Naval Daring. 2s. 60. Nimrod on the Chase and the Road. 1s. each. Oliphant's Journey to Nepal. 2s. 60. To be followed by A Popular Account of the Electric Telegraph. Fall of Jerusalem. By Dean Milman. John Murray, Albemarle Street. And to be obtained at all booksellers and railway stations. Now ready in 8vo, price 14s, cloth, lettered, with a lithograph facsimile of the corrected folio of 1632. Notes and emendations to the text of Shakespeare's plays, from early manuscript corrections in a copy of the folio of 1632 in the possession of John Payne Collier, Esq., FSA, forming a supplemental volume to the works of Shakespeare by the same editor, in 8 volumes 8vo. As only a limited number of the above work have been printed, purchases of Mr. Collier's Shakespeare are requested to complete their sets without delay. Whitaker and Company, Ave Maria Lane. On 1st of January, price 1s, no, I, new series. The Ecclesiastic. Contents. Latin Poetry, Classical and Medieval. Cathedral and Collegiate Reform. Sir F. B. Head's Fortnight in Ireland. The Bishop of Exeter's Letter on Confession. Greek Hymnology. Reviews and Notices. The publisher, at the suggestion of friends, and with a view to extending its circulation amongst clergy and laity, has reduced the price from 2 shillings to 1 shilling, for which he can only look to be reimbursed by a large increase in the sale. A few sets of 14 volumes complete may be had, price 5l. Now ready, price 1s, part 2. Of Conchinalia, Outlines of Sermons for Parochial Use Throughout the Year. By the Rev. Henry Thompson, M.A., Cantab, Curate of Rington, Somerset. It contains sermons for the second Sunday after Christmas, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Sundays after Epiphany, Septuagesimus Sunday, Sexagesimus Sunday, the Circumcision, Epiphany, and Conversion of St. Paul. To be continued monthly. Part 1, price 1s. London, J. Masters, Aldersgate Street, and New Bond Street. To all who have farms or gardens. The Gardener's Chronicle and Agricultural Gazette. The horticultural part edited by Professor Linley. Of Saturday, December 25th, contains articles on Ammonia Sulfate of, by Mr. Prideaux. Berwickshire Farmers Club. Butter Taste in. Calendar, Horticultural. Cattle to Feed. Quarter Evil and C. in. To Measure. Cork Insect, with Engraving. Cottage Laborers. Cucumber, Hunters. Draining by Mr. Hewitt Davis. Eau de lessive. Flax fiber. Game laws. Glass walls. Grafting, wax. Grapes, coloring by Mr. Watson. Guano, Peruvian, substitute for. Haygarth, Mr. Presentation to. Land Question by Hamilton, Rev. Maize. Manure Tank, Liquid by Mr. Rothwell. Mechie's, Mr. Address. Mildew Vine. Pears Late by Mr. Rivers. Pentus carnea, cellular tissue of. Pigs Greaves for. Plant Growing, Amateur. Plowing. Potatoes to Cook by Mr. Cuthill. Poultry. Poultry Show, Report of the Hitchin and Dorchester. Roots After Tears by Mr. Mechie. Roses in Pots, Culture of. Skimia laureola. Smithfield Club, Implements. Societies, Proceedings of the Linnean. Botanical of Edinburgh. Flax Improvement. Coggeshall Agricultural. Strabo's Geography, by Meyer, reviewed. Tomato, Cherry. Tree of 10,000 Images. Transplanting a Large. Van Dynen's Land, Enchanted Valley in. Vine Mildew. Walls, Conservative. Ewing's Glass. Wheat, Late Sowing. The Gardener's Chronicle and Agricultural Gazette contains, in addition to the above, the Covent Garden, Mark Lane, Smithfield, and Liverpool prices, with returns from the potato, hop, hay, coal, timber, bark, wool, and seed markets, and a complete newspaper, with a condensed account of all the transactions of the week. Order of any newsvendor. Office for Advertisements 5. Upper Wellington Street, Covent Garden, London. The Domestic Architecture of the Middle Ages. *The 14th century is in the press and will be ready shortly. The prospectus, table of contents, and list of plates, N.C., in the volume, may be had free by post on application. Books for presents. The 5th edition of the Glossary of Architecture. 3 volumes. Illustrated by upwards of 1,700 engravings. In octavo. 1 guinea, Rickman's Gothic Architecture. 12 mo. 3s. 60. An Introduction to the Study of Gothic Architecture. By J. H. Parker, F.S.A. A catalogue of old and second-hand books from the stock of John Henry Parker, Oxford, is now being issued, and may be had on application. Oxford and London, John Henry Parker. Just published, FCP 8 VO, 6s. Democritus in London, with the mad pranks and conceits of Motley and Robin Goodfellow, to which are added notes, Festivus, and C. by George Daniel, author of Merry England in the Olden Time, the Modern Dunciad, and C. An exquisite metrical conceit, sparkling with wit and humor, in the true spirit of Aristophanes, in which Democritus guides his brilliant and merry muse through every fantastic measure, evincing grace in the most grotesque attitudes. As a relief to his cutting sarcasm and fun, the laughing philosopher has introduced some fine descriptive scenes, and passages of deep pathos, eloquence, and beauty. Not the least remarkable feature in this very remarkable book are the recondite and curious notes, at once so critical and philosophical, so varied and so amusing, so full of interesting anecdote and racy reminiscences. They form a rich mine of classical learning and antiquarian knowledge. To genius and virtue Democritus will prove a delightful companion and friend, but a well-pickled rod to vice and folly, a scourge to make wince hollow pretenders of every kind, even down to the critical impostor and the stage-struck buffoon. C. Athenaeum, Critic, and C. William Pickering, 177. Piccadilly. Spanish Catalogue. Just issued, B. Querech's Catalogue of Rare and Valuable Spanish and Portuguese Books, gratis on application. Bernard Querech, 16. Castle Street, Leicester Square. Italian Literature. Just issued, B. Querech's Catalogue of Cheap, Valuable, and Curious Italian Books, gratis on application. Bernard Querech, 16. Castle Street, Leicester Square. Now ready, small 4-2, handsomely bound in cloth 2L, 2S, Morocco, 2L, 12S, 60. Poetry of the Year, passages from the poets descriptive of the seasons. with 22 colored illustrations from drawings by the following eminent artists: T. Creswick R.A., C. Davidson, W. Lee, J. Muller, E. Duncan, Burkitt Foster, D. Cox, H. Lejeune, W. Hemsley, C. Brandwhite, J. Wolfe, C. Weigall, Harrison Weir, R. E. V. B. Lucette E. Barker. Bids fair to be the most beautiful and attractive of the gift books of the present season. The designs, which are for the most part exceedingly good, have been lithographed and printed in colors so as to present the appearance of exquisite and really well-finished drawings, and the letterpress is compiled from the works of our most standard writers. This, in our opinion, is by far the best plan for illustrated works. The words should be worthy of the pictures, and then those who go to the expense of such works have the satisfaction of knowing that they have got the best of their kind, in both the text and the illustrations, instead of having, as is too often the case, capital pictures and second or third-rate prose or poetry. The book before us is, in every way, worthy to be placed upon the drawing-room table of Her Most Gracious Majesty, and we doubt not that it will shortly be found there. English Churchman. Poetry of the Year is a most richly illustrated volume, containing more than a score of beautiful designs lithographed and printed in colors with a delightful effect. Several of them, we may instance the timber wagon on the wintry road, the rich summer sunset, the view of Windermere, the group of cattle, and the children gathering spring flowers, have the effect of finished watercolor drawings, and when we add that among the contributors of designs are Mr. Creswick, Mr. David Cox, Mr. Duncan, Mr. Davidson, Mr. Weir, E. V. B., and others hardly less admired, the reader will understand that the volume is above the average of illustrated books generally. We have to say also that the accompanying passages from the poets are extremely well made, with a true feeling and a Catholic taste. The volume well deserves success. Examiner. This is a charming volume, as much to be prized for the value of the letterpress, as admired for the beauty of the illustrations, a remark applicable to few books so ornamental. The poetry consists of selections from English classic authors, on subjects connected with the four seasons. Altogether, the volume is worthy of high praise, and will doubtless be a favorite gift book of the new year, having also the advantage of being a book of pleasant reference for all the year round. Literary Gazette. George Bell, 186. Fleet Street. First French book, by the Rev. T. K. Arnold. In 12mo, price 5s. 60, the third edition of the first French book. On the plan of Henry's first Latin book. By the Rev. Thomas Kerchever Arnold, M.A., Rector of Linden, and formerly Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, author of the first German book. Mr. Arnold has succeeded in preparing a work admirably adapted to meet the wants of English students of the French language. The philosophical explanation of the changes of consonants, together with the frequent references to Latin words and idioms by way of illustration and comparison, render it far superior as a school book to any other introduction, even from the pen of a native writer. The sound principles of imitation and repetition which have secured for the author a reputation widely extended and well deserved, are here happily exemplified. His account of the differences of idiom is very satisfactory and complete. Whoever thoroughly masters it will rarely want anything further on the subject. Athenaeum. Rivington's, St. Paul's Churchyard, and Waterloo Place. Of whom may be had. A Key to the Exercises by M. DeLille. Price 2s. 60. Just published, price 6d, or sent free on receipt of 8 postage stamps. Fennell's Shakespeare Repository. Containing interesting articles on the true orthography and etymology of Shakespeare's name, remarks on his bequest to his wife, Shakespeare considered as a comic writer, curious account of a great and destructive flood at Stratford-on-Avon in his time, the government, and Shakespeare's house, remarks on Shakespeare's gallantry, notes on his pedigree, on Shakespeare's manuscripts, old London theatres. Some accounts of his mulberry tree and walnut tree, ancient verses on his coming to London, and C. Published by James H. Fennell, 1. Warwick Court, Holborn, London. Books on sale by John Russell Smith. 36, Soho Square, London. Holbein's Dance of Death, with an historical and literary introduction by an antiquary. Square Post 8vo, with 54 engravings, being the most accurate copies ever executed of these gems of art, and a frontispiece of an ancient bedstead at Aix-la-Chapelle, with the Dance of Death carved on it, engraved by Fairholt, cloth, 9s. The designs are executed with a spirit and fidelity quite extraordinary. They are indeed most truthful. Athenaeum. Lowers M.A. Essays on English Surnames. 2 volumes post 8vo. 3rd edition, greatly enlarged. Cloth 12s. Biographia Britannica Literaria, or Biography of Literary Characters of Great Britain and Ireland, arranged in chronological order. By Thomas Wright, M.A. FSA, member of the Institute of France. 2 thick volumes 8vo. Cloth. Volume 1, Anglo-Saxon Period. Volume 2, Anglo-Norman Period. 6s, each, published at 12s, each. Published under the superintendence of the Royal Society of Literature. Coins. An Introduction to the Study of Ancient and Modern Coins. By J. Y. Ackerman. FCP 8vo, with numerous wood engravings, from the original coins 6s, 6d. Coins of the Romans relating to Britain, described and illustrated. By J. Y. Ackerman, FSA 2nd edition 8vo, greatly enlarged with plates and woodcuts, 10s, 6d, cloth. Guide to Archaeology. An archaeological index to remains of antiquity of the Celtic, Romano-British, and Anglo-Saxon periods. By John Young Ackerman, Fellow and Secretary of the Society of Antiquaries. 1 volume 8vo, illustrated with numerous engravings, comprising upward of 500 objects, cloth 15s. One of the first wants of an incipient antiquary is the facility of comparison, and here it is furnished him at one glance. The plates, indeed, form the most valuable part of the book, both by their number and the judicious selection of types and examples which they contain. It is a book which we can, on this account, safely and warmly recommend to all who are interested in the antiquities of their native land. Literary Gazette. A book of such utility, so concise, so clear, so well condensed from such varied and voluminous sources, cannot fail to be generally acceptable. Art Union. Writes thus: Essays on the Literature, Popular Superstitions, and History of England in the Middle Ages. 2 volumes post 8vo, cloth 16s. Writes thus: St. Patrick's Purgatory, an essay on the legends of Purgatory, Hell, and Paradise, current during the Middle Ages. Post 8vo, cloth 6s. The Nursery Rhymes of England, collected chiefly from oral tradition. Edited by J. O. Hallowell. 4th edition 12mo, with 38 designs by W. B. Scott. 4s, 60, cloth. Popular Rhymes and Nursery Tales, with historical elucidations, a sequel to The Nursery Rhymes of England. Edited by J. O. Hallowell. Royal 18mo, 4s, 60. Lower's Curiosities of Heraldry, with illustrations from Old English writers. 8vo, numerous engravings. Cloth 14s. Herald's Visitations. An index to all the pedigrees and arms in the heraldic visitations and other genealogical misses in the British Museum. By G. Sims of the Manuscript Department. 8vo. Closely printed in double columns, cloth 15s. Asterisk, an indispensable book to those engaged in genealogical or topographical pursuits, affording a ready clue to the pedigrees and arms of above 30,000 of the gentry of England, their residences, and c. distinguishing the different families of the same name in every country, as recorded by the heralds in their visitations, with indexes to other genealogical misses in the British Museum. It has been the work of immense labor. No public library ought to be without it. Consuetudines Canci. A History of Gavelkind, and Other Remarkable Customs in the County of Kent, by Charles Sandys, Esq., FSA, Kantianus, illustrated with FAC similes, A very handsome volume, 8vo, cloth, 15s. Bruce's Rev. J. C. Historical and topographical account of the Roman wall from the Tyne to the Solway. Thick 8vo, 35 plates and 194 woodcuts, half Morocco, 1l, 1s. Bosworth's Rev. Dr. Compendious Anglo-Saxon and English Dictionary. 8vo, closely printed in treble columns, cloth, 12s. This is not a mere abridgment of the large dictionary, but almost an entirely new work. In this compendious one will be found, at a very moderate price, all that is most practical and valuable in the former expensive edition, with a great accession of new words and matter. Author's Preface. Analecta Anglo-Saxonica. Selections in prose and verse from Anglo-Saxon literature, with an introductory ethnological essay, and notes, critical and explanatory. By Louis F. Klipstein, of the University of Gießen, 2 thick volumes post 8vo, cloth, 12s. Original price 18s. A Delectus in Anglo-Saxon, intended as a first-class book in the language. By the Rev. W. Barnes, of St. John's College, Cambridge, author of the poems and glossary in the Dorset dialect. 12mo, cloth 2s, 60. To those who wish to possess a critical knowledge of their own native English, some acquaintance with Anglo-Saxon is indispensable, and we have never seen an introduction better calculated than the present to supply the wants of a beginner in a short space of time. The declensions and conjugations are well stated, and illustrated by references to the Greek, Latin, French, and other languages. A philosophical spirit pervades every part. The Delectus consists of short pieces on various subjects, with extracts from Anglo-Saxon history and the Saxon Chronicle. There is a good glossary at the end. Athenaeum, October 20, 1849. Facts and speculations on the origin and history of playing cards. By W. A. Chatto, author of Jackson's History of Wood Engraving. In one handsome volume 8vo, illustrated with many engravings, both plain and colored, cloth, 1l, 1s. It is exceedingly amusing. Atlas. Curious, entertaining, and really learned book. Rambler. Indeed, the entire production deserves our warmest approbation. Literary Gazette. A perfect fund of antiquarian research, and most interesting even to persons who never play at cards. Tate's Mag. Bibliotheca Madrigaliana, a bibliographical account of the music and poetical works published in England in the 16th and 17th centuries, under the titles of madrigals, ballets, airs, canzonets, and c. By Dr. Rimbault. 8vo, cloth 5s. A dictionary of archaic and provincial words, obsolete phrases, proverbs, and ancient customs from the reign of Edward I. By James Orchard Hallowell, FRS, FSA, and c. 2 volumes 8vo, containing upwards of 1,000 pages closely printed in double columns, cloth 1l, 1s. It contains about 50,000 words, embodying all the known scattered glossaries of the English language, forming a complete key to the reading of the works of our old poets, dramatists, theologians, and other authors, whose works abound with allusions, of which explanations are not to be found in ordinary dictionaries and books of reference. Most of the principal archaisms are illustrated by examples selected from early unedited misses and rare books, and by far the greater portion will be found to be original authorities. A little book of songs and ballads, gathered from ancient music books, MS, and printed by E. F. Rimbault, Doctor of Laws, and C. Post 8vo, pages 240, half bound in Morocco, 6s. Antique ballads sung to crowds of old, now cheaply bought for thrice their weight in gold. Guide to the Anglo-Saxon tongue, with lessons in verse and prose, for the use of learners. By E. J. Vernon, B.A., Oxon 12mo, cloth 5s, 60. This will be found useful as a second-class book, or to those well versed in other languages. Printed by Thomas Clark Shaw, of No. 8 New Street Square, at No. 5. New Street Square, in the parish of St. Bride, in the City of London, and published by George Bell, of No. 186. Fleet Street, in the parish of St. Dunstan in the West, in the City of London, publisher, at number 186. Fleet Street aforesaid. Saturday, January 1st, 1853. Thomas Clark Shaw. George Bell.